Good evening, everyone. If you would take your seats, I'd like to call the meeting of the City Council to order. City Clerk will call the roll.
The record will reflect that all members of council are present. Councilmember Rosansky will be arriving late.
Mr. City Attorney, is there a closed session report?
There is, Mr. Mayor, in the sense that the City Council met in closed session to discuss the matters that were listed on our open session agenda. No reportable action was taken, however.
Thank you. Will the audience please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Councilmember Leslie Daigle, and then please remain standing for the invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Father and God, your children gathered tonight to ask for your wisdom, for your grace, and for your ability to make these decisions that we make tonight in the interest of our community, with compassion for the least among us, and with vision for the long-term impacts upon our city. We bring and pray for those in our community in need, for our troops overseas, and that you would always help us govern wisely and justly here in Newport Beach. In your name, amen. For our first presentation, if I could call forward Nancy Thompson, our Library Literacy Board President. I'm going to read a proclamation as Nancy is coming forward, and then I will come down to award that. Whereas the need for a highly literate citizenry is necessary as Newport Beach moves towards an increasingly challenging future, and whereas approximately 10% of the residents of Newport Beach and many of the adults employed within the area of the city are lacking the literacy skills necessary to meet these challenges, and whereas the lack of literacy skills impacts not only their lives and the lives of their families, but their ability to work productively, their full participation as citizens, residents, and employees of our city. And whereas Newport Beach Public Library Literacy Services works with adults seeking to improve their literacy skills to enable them to achieve success in their lives at home, at work, and in the community. And whereas Newport Beach Public Library Literacy Services hosts an annual International Literacy Day event to highlight the importance of literacy in society and in the great strides that program participants have made, now therefore I, Keith D. Curry, Mayor of the City of Newport Beach, on behalf of the entire Newport Beach City Council, hereby proclaim September 16, 2010 as International Literacy Day in the City of Newport Beach, and urge my fellow citizens to learn more about the importance of literacy and to become involved with literacy in the community.
The gentleman in the back is trying to take a picture. Come on up and take one and get a good shot.
Thank you, Mayor Curry, and it's with pleasure that I accept this proclamation on behalf of the entire team and all those associated with Newport Mesa Pro Literacy. And I want to invite you all to attend our own special International Literacy Celebration that's going to be taking place at the Central Newport Beach Library this Thursday at 10 a.m. It's going to be a fun event. It's frankly a very moving event as well, as you hear stories of those for whom their whole world is opened up now that they have the ability to read. It's also good food because you have some wonderful food brought by those adult learners who share specialties from their heritage.
Nancy, they're watching at home too. You need to speak on the microphone.
Excellent, I will. On a more serious note, what we like to call Newport Beach's best kept secret. There are over 23,000 individuals in our area who have the need of literacy services, 400,000 in the Orange County community. And for those that have issues with literacy, it impacts not only them, but their family, their children, their community, and their business associates. So I want to say on behalf of our 105 dedicated volunteer tutors, our 125 students with a waiting list of 25 more, the advisory board, the staff, our director, Cheryl Weiss, I want to thank you not only for the recognition, but the support that you do give us. And in the last 12 months, we've logged in just under 10,000 volunteer hours. So you've helped turn your support into a powerful program for the community. And it makes Newport Beach a great place to live. That's what makes it a great place. So thank you very much. We hope you'll join us. And we thank you for your support.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That's one of the best and most needed programs that we have in our community. We should be very, very proud of what we do in library literacy. Next, we have a very special group of friends with us tonight from our sister city in Antibes, France. Councilmember Webb and I were privileged to be in Antibes in July to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the relationship between Newport Beach and Antibes, and I can tell you that it is a wonderful sister city, and the hospitality could not have been better. We both had just an absolutely terrific time. I will tell you, where we may not have had a very warm summer, they did, and it was great to be there when the sun was shining. It was also great to partake in the 50th anniversary of the Outwin Jazz Festival. It is an internationally known jazz festival featuring George Benson this year and a cast of really jazz superstars. France is a country that really treasures and celebrates jazz. And you can see that in the joie de vivre of the people and of the entire community. Well, now it's our turn, and we have a delegation of 5 people here from Antibes who are going to come forward and receive this proclamation, which we also have in French. I'm going to read the English version, and then you all can read it perhaps later tonight, and I think you actually speak better English than I do, though. So let me just say, whereas the cities of Antibes and Newport Beach are celebrating in the year 2010 as the 20th anniversary of the relationship between the jumelage of Antibes, France, and the Newport Beach Sister City Association. And whereas during this 20-year people-to-people relationship, the cities have exchanged visits with the city and organized delegations and students in resident programs. And whereas the bonds of friendship, goodwill, and understanding exemplified by the Sister City movement have resulted from these community and educational exchanges. And whereas the city of Newport Beach extends the warm hand of friendship to the delegation from Antibes as we celebrate this significant anniversary of our relationship. And now, therefore, I, Keith D. Curry, Mayor of the City of Newport Beach, on behalf of the City Council, staff, and citizens of Newport Beach, extend our warmest congratulations to the jumelage city officials and the citizens of Antibes, France. Be it resolved and heartily proclaimed that in celebration of our 20th anniversary of our friendship, we send our best wishes for 20 more years of close interpersonal ties between our people, signed this 14th day of September, 2010. Mayor Jean Leonetti of Antibes was very gracious as we were to host us as we were in France, and last night we were pleased to have a delegation to my home for dinner. It was truly a special event and a wonderful evening with friends that will be friends for many, many years. We also have many members of the Newport Beach Sister City delegation, so I would invite our French delegates to come and join with Councilmember Webb and I as we have a little gift for you, and we'll take a photograph, and then I see Wolf Burg is here, and perhaps we'll ask him to say a few words.
I would like to thank Mayor Keith Curry for his kind words and for making us so welcome. We arrived only yesterday. We have already seen a lot of Newport Beach. We have met many people. We have come across very friendly people who invited us for various occasions. We all enjoy it immensely, and we look forward to what our friends of the Newport Beach Sister City Association have to come for us within the next few days. They have worked very hard, Cherry and her crew, to prepare our visit. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll go home with fantastic souvenirs of our stay in Newport Beach. And hope that within not too long from now you will come to visit us again, and that we can keep up this relationship over many years. Thank you very much.
Keith has stolen all the words I could have possibly said that were very meaningful. However, I have had the opportunity to visit Antibes 4 times. The first time was in 1991, which was 19 years ago, and I have enjoyed myself, and my wife and I have both enjoyed the friendship and camaraderie that you get there. And Antibes has, I think, is it 9 sister cities? Or 8 sister cities. And it's really an enjoyable event when you get there and they have more than one, particularly the Irish. Are from Kinsale are quite some celebrants. So at any rate, our citizens of Newport, if you get a chance to go to Antibes or go to France, make sure that you put Antibes on your list of places to must see. Thank you.
The next presentation is from the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, a letter of appreciation for the Rhine Channel Project.
Mr. Mayor, Brandi Outwin is here from, formerly of the Santa Ana Regional Board, very recently of the Los Angeles Regional Board, to deliver a brief message for us. We're glad she's here.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I've been the Santa Ana Regional Board's point of contact for projects involving the Rhine Channel up until yesterday. And on behalf of the Santa Ana Board, I'm here to formally present to you a letter that was mailed on July 26th. The Regional Board sent this letter to the City of Newport Beach commending you and your staff for your active involvement in the remediation of the Rhine Channel. The proactive stance taken by the City contributes to the efforts to improve water quality conditions in the Rhine Channel and in the Bay overall. They also help to implement the Newport Bay Rhine Channel TNDLs, which were established by US EPA in 2002. The Regional Water Board staff strongly supports your proposed dredging project. We have been working closely with City staff and representatives from other state and federal agencies in hopes of ensuring the success of the dredging project. The Santa Ana Regional Water Board applauds your leadership and diligence and thanks you for the commendable efforts to remediate the Rhine Channel. So I have a copy of this letter to give to you, but it was also mailed to Daigle just a couple of weeks ago. You're welcome. Give it to me since he's coming.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. It's a very important, good words here, and a very important project, and the Water Board, Water Quality Control Board's support is very helpful.
For the folks at home, this is a project that's in the city's budget for this current year, about $4 million, and it's taken a lot of effort to move forward on something that the state and the federal EPA have told us that eventually someone needs to take care of that problem, and it was, I think, very forthright of the city and the city council to step forward and say it's going to be us, and it's going to be during this time when you're in office to make this expenditure and clean that up. because it's a problem that dates back to the 30s and 40s and 50s. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite to the podium Claudia Patino and Marlon Patino, who are going to express some words to us. They are, Claudia is the sister. She's a city employee. She's a sister of a real American hero, Corporal Claudio Patino of the Marine Corps, who was lost in the Middle East. And our heart goes out to their family. I understand that he was recently decorated for his service in the Middle East. And please come to the podium.
Thank you, Mayor, and Newport City Council and the residents of Newport Beach. Unfortunately, my parents couldn't be here. Our sister's having a baby right now, a little girl, so she's at the hospital. My dad's at work right now. But we'd like to present this to the city for all your support with my brother's memorial fund.
We accept this on behalf of all of the city employees and all the city families.
Thank you very much.
We sometimes take for granted the real American heroes in our midst, and Corporal Patino reminds us of that every day because of his sacrifice. Thank you so much. Notice to the public.
The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the council. Speakers must limit comments to 5 minutes on agenda items. The council has a discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn cell phones off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for council announcements or matters which council members would like placed on a future agenda for discussion, action, or report.
Thank you. Councilmember Daigle.
Yes, at this meeting I wanted to report on the progress being made in the past year by the Airport Working Group, AWG. In order to give equal time to both groups, I'll be talking about airfare at the next meeting. And what AWG wanted me to share is that they are, of course, one of the signatories on our settlement agreement, and they are preparing for the next round of negotiations to mitigate the long-term impact of JWA on surrounding communities. They also are very active. They monitor activities at JWA, including operations, traffic flow, and passenger load. They have kind of a new president, Tony Corey. He's a businessman with about 35 years of business management experience, and he had the organization adopt a fiscal restraint policy. So they are developing a budget, and they're doing a lot of fundraising. As a matter of fact, their membership is at an all-time high. They've increased their membership base in several high-gross areas, Balboa Island, Irvine Terrace, Lido Isle, and also Costa Mesa. So they have a growing membership base and a growing revenue base. In a meeting with the various airport groups and activists over the past couple months on the Duke issue and the departure procedure, I think it would be appropriate to request from the mayor, because they'd like for us to take kind of a strong stance with it, is if the mayor were to send a letter to the FAA that the city wants the Stroud departure procedure to follow the classic tracks of the Bay, and that the FAA tests the new procedure so we don't have to do it again. And those seem to be the two most powerful sentiments that came out of those interactions.
And I've consulted with both Councilmember Daigle and the city manager on this, and I'm certainly enthusiastic about sending such a letter. So thank you. Councilmember Gardner.
I know that we are in a cost-saving mode, but this is something that has bothered me before, and I wanted to bring it up to see if anybody else cared besides me, which is the Planning Commission minutes. I found when I was first on council and we had projects that the more extensive minutes were exceedingly helpful to see what the discussion was at that level. And now we have, very basically it says it was a 4-3 vote or a 6-0 vote or 6-1 vote or something. And it's a 7-0 vote, I don't care. I mean, I figure I probably know it. But when it's a 4-3 vote particularly, so many times they go into issues that we don't then have to go into because we can see what the logic was and how they arrived at a decision. So I didn't know if anybody else would like to see the expanded minutes or if I'm the only one that misses them. Because if I'm the only one, then I won't ask for it to be changed. Well, I seem to be the only one, so you can strike that off your list then.
I have none. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Mr. Selich.
I actually had nothing, but I just got a text from my wife requesting that I announce that this Friday will be the new issue of Newport Beach Magazine. It's a new magazine that's coming out that is focusing on issues in Newport Beach and be available on most of your driveways and in various places around town.
Unless you
know what?
Unless you put up a
she
no
has
soliciting
higher power
sign.
than you guys have.
Mr. Rosansky.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Hand.
I have three things, Mr. Mayor. In follow-on to Councilmember Daigle's comments about the airport, I think it's generally acknowledged here at the dais for the City Council as well as in the community that the control of John Wayne Airport is the #1 quality of life issue that we have to deal with here over the longer run. We have had a strategy that we've been pursuing for some time to gain corridor cities approval of our principles with regard to restriction of operations on John Wayne Airport. And thanks to the efforts of our city manager, Dave Kiff, and to Councilmember Daigle, we have added another city to that group, the city of Villa Park. I had the pleasure of going there on August the 24th to present the city's position, Newport Beach's position with that, and I found them to be a very gracious and highly receptive group. They were very enthusiastic about joining the Corridor Cities group, and now, along with the cities of, Anaheim, Costa Mesa, Santa Ana, Orange, Irvine, Laguna Beach, and Tustin, as well as the Foothill Community Association and the Emerald Bay Community, all have signed on to those Corridor Cities principles, and so we continue to fight the fight and make progress, actually, on that issue. Next, I had the very great pleasure of being at the Junior Lifeguard graduation ceremony along with 1,200 of mostly Newport Beach's finest children between the ages of 9 and 15, I think it is. And it was really terrific. And it's just a great example of the really wonderful programs that this city operates on behalf of its citizens. This one is particularly interesting because over the years, if you think about it, the kids that have actually directly participated in the program, their parents, their grandparents, it literally has impacted tens of thousands of residents here in Newport Beach. It's certainly among the most wonderful and impactful programs that the city offers, and I was very pleased to be a part of that graduation. It happened to take place on the only sunny, warm day of the entire summer, so at least they got a good send-off, those poor little kids that shivered through their final competitions. Lastly, I wanted to offer an update on the land use planning project that is affecting the greater Lido Marina Village area. The residents may be aware that with a public-private partnership involving the owners of Lido Marina Village, Via Lido Plaza, and the city, all three have combined now in a voluntary effort to draw up an integrated land use plan for that whole arc of land, along with some of the other miscellaneous landholders here. That project has moved along very nicely under the leadership of Tim Collins and Associates. We have now selected a land use planner that will move forward. I understand that we're just about ready to sign a contract with them. The land use planner that was selected is William Hasmalik, or WHA, as they are generally known. Very well known, very well qualified firm. It was the unanimous choice of the three major landholders that are funding this project, and we're very much looking forward to the results of that activity, which will involve the public and be available to the public all along the way over the next 3 or 4 months, culminating, we hope, by no later than January, with a view of a vision of what that whole land area can look like, and a conclusion about what we ought to do with this site, the current City Hall site. So we're looking forward to that project moving along and public involvement in it. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Henn. Well, it's been a busy couple of weeks. First of all, I want to thank everyone who came out for the Meet the Mayor session at the Balboa Library. We had a great session, some good questions, and I really appreciated the opportunity to meet with some folks out there and talk about what was going on in the city. We'll do one more Meet the Mayor. We'll do it at the Central Library in October. You know, we have a great diversity here in Newport Beach and Orange County, and this past week I was privileged to attend both the Ramadan dinner and the Orange County Armenian Festival, and both of which were truly delightful events to participate with. One of the good things about being mayor is that you get to meet other mayors, and I got a call just before Labor Day by my friend Mick Cornett, who's the mayor of Oklahoma City, who was in Southern California for the weekend and wanted to come by and visit the Oasis Senior Center. Mayor Cornett has gotten a project for building 4 senior centers in Oklahoma City, and he wanted to see what a state-of-the-art center looked like. I think it's safe to say that Mayor Cornett was duly impressed by what we've done at Oasis, and I think it's already become a national model for what a good senior center is going to be. I also received a very nice note from Mayor Phil Gordon, the mayor of Phoenix, who visits Newport Beach often because of business, and Mayor Gordon did offer to change jobs with me during the month of August, but I declined for Phoenix. On the 9th of September, I was privileged to be elected to the Board of Directors of the Orange County League of California Cities, and I look forward to working on a regional basis to address the issues that cities face, particularly in ensuring that our funding is not disrupted any further from Sacramento through support of Proposition 22 that will protect local funding. Last Friday, the Nautical Museum held another reception in its efforts to continue to expand on the peninsula. And for those that haven't been there, I encourage you to get down and check out the Nautical Museum. It's a great community resource, and it's embarking on becoming an even greater regional resource that I think the entire community will be very proud of. And then finally, people ask, what is the toughest decision that you have to make as mayor? And I will tell you, it is when you are a judge at the Corona del Mar Coastline Car Classic, and you have to pick one car to win the trophy for the Mayor's Award. It was a very difficult decision, but there were some just wonderful automobiles, and it turned out to be a sunny day. So if you missed it this year, by all means, don't miss it next year.
So what's your car?
I picked a I tipped my hand actually in the Daily Pilot. I did pick a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air. 1955, of course, the year the Dodgers won the World Series, the year I was born, and the year Disneyland opened, and it was the year Chevrolet dominated the automotive markets. Okay, consent calendar, Madam City Clerk.
All matters listed under consent calendar, items 1 through 21, are considered by the council to be routine and will all be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. The council members have received detailed staff reports on each of the items recommending an action. There will be no separate discussion of these items prior to the time the council votes on the motion unless members of the council, staff, or the public request specific items to be discussed and or removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Members of the public who wish to discuss the consent calendar item should come forward to the lectern upon invitation by the mayor and state their name and item number. If the optional signing card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium.
Thank you. Mr. Selich.
I have none.
Mr. Ozansky.
I have none.
Mr. Henn.
I have none.
Councilmember Daigle.
I have none.
Councilmember Gardner.
I have a change to the minutes, page 555, the second paragraph. I ask that the naming of the Oasis be directed to the Parks, Beaches, and Recreation Commission, not to staff. And I'd like to pull number 4.
Okay, number 4. Mr. Webb.
I'd like to pull number 7.
7. Mr. City Manager, any items to pull?
We would have pulled 7, so thank you, Mr. Webb. And then just a note that there's an amended recommendation for item 14. And you have that in front of you. It involves an increase in the net reduction in the contract for West Coast arborists.
Okay. Does any member of the audience have any items on the consent calendar they would like to pull for further discussion? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of items, consent calendar items 1 through 21, except to note the change in the minutes from Councilmember Gardner, and items 4 and 7, and noting the amended recommendation for item number 14.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public discussion on any of the items that we're going to vote on the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, item 4, please.
Yes. Chris, perhaps you can, when we had this before, I asked whether the dock configuration had been approved by the Harbor Commission. There was some confusion on the part of the Harbor Commission as to what its role actually had been. So could you just clarify that for the record?
Thank you. My name is Chris Miller, Harbor Resources Manager, and there was some work done on the docks at 3388. It was just maintenance, routine work. I think it was redecking. There was not any reconfiguration, no piles driven. That action was handled at a staff level, did not need to come to the Harbor Commission. I understand that the applicant may be considering reconfiguring those docks in the future, in which case that'll be handled just like any other dock project that we have. But in question, it was a simple maintenance permit that was handled at the city level.
Okay, because staff had said, not you, but someone on staff had said that it had come to the Harbor Commission, and that was the confusion, so it really didn't.
Perhaps it did not come to the Harbor Commission, it came to Harbor Resources, and perhaps that was the confusion.
All right, that was the confusion then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Move the action.
Is there a second? Motion and second. Anyone from the audience wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Item 7.
That's an item which was a request to list the RAWLINS Solar House in Newport Beach to the Newport Beach Register of Historical Properties. I'm not so concerned about that, but I did read a letter that came from our Arts Commission in which they indicated that they felt that this was more appropriately a Class 2 historic landmark rather than a major historic landmark. And I tend to agree with them from the standpoint of I cannot put this house, which is 30 to 32 years old, in the same category with a pavilion, which is a major historical resource within the city. I feel that its historic significance is more in the architect that designed the house than the house itself, and I have difficulty when you read the definition under Class 1, which says major historical landmark, a building, structure, object, site or natural feature or major historic significance. The property exemplifies historic architectural themes of local and statewide importance and serves as a significant part of the heritage of Newport. I just do not see how a 30-year-old house can have a significant part of the heritage of Newport. The second level is, I actually probably feel that a Class 3 would be more appropriate, but I would go with the analysis that the Arts Commission has come up with. But the second level, Class 2, is a building structure, so on and so forth, which is of historical significance as opposed to major historical significance. And so that I would like to have us amend the recommendation to list this structure as a being added to the city's Newport Beach's Register of Historical Places as a historic landmark Class 2. So I make that motion.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and second.
Before there would be a vote, Mr. Mayor, I don't know, just check to see, nice to check to see if city staff has a comment either way on that.
Katie?
Katie, just,
I'm happy to address those comments if you'd like. We also have the architectural historian that filed the application on behalf of the property owner here available to perhaps address that question as well.
I'd like to hear from the architect.
Is there a substantive distinction?
The criteria are somewhat subjective. However,
But does the being a Class 2 versus a Class 1,
Right.
does that result in anything different?
it doesn't result in anything different to the property owner, except that I'm sure the property owner would like to have it recognized as to what it believes as a major historic landmark. Just to note, the reason for the classification, staff's recommendation of the classification as a major historic landmark is due to the property's eligibility for listing to the National Register of Historic Places. That is, despite the age of 30 years. It's eligible due to basically the high level of design and integrity that the structure has, and that it was designed by a master architect. In terms of its applicability to the criteria for Class 1, the property exemplifies what we believe to be architectural themes of local and statewide importance, and serves as a significant part of the architectural heritage of the city. Staff also believes the criteria for evaluation should be applied on an individual case-by-case basis and not comparatively, because the structures such as the Balboa Pavilion would be eligible for the National Register and is listed to the National Register for an entirely different reason.
Katie, isn't this house for sale now?
Yes, it is.
So is there any significance to them selling a house now that has historical significance? I mean, I love to recognize homes and properties here in the city that do have historical significance. I don't, my sense of it is, or my feeling, maybe the applicant will come forward and explain, using our ordinance to somehow market their home.
I don't believe that's the case, and in fact, I would defer to the applicant's representative to
Good. I'd like to hear a member of our
Would the applicant's representative like to step forward and make a few comments? Please state your name, please.
I'm Laura Jansen. I'm a senior architectural historian from Historic Resources Group. We're historic preservation consultants. And I'm speaking on behalf of the owner, Michael Lefetra. And we worked with him on 8 buildings at least in the last 8 years in Los Angeles, doing exactly the same thing. It's a source of pride for him to buy a house, restore it, and then landmark it, hoping that it will have some sort of protection for the next owner, basically. I mean, that's it. It has there's no monetary issues at all. So.
Mr. Webb?
I guess I have a real problem with that from the standpoint of maybe not the next buyer, but the buyer after that may want to make substantial changes to the house because he's bought a piece of property that he feels has become somewhat, needs to be changed. And that I don't mind an owner asking for it, assuming that that owner is going to continue to own the property and is willing to put up with the requirements of a historical place. But I really do have a problem from a property rights standpoint obligating future owners down the road to being restricted on what they can do on a house that they have purchased. And I realize it's a buyer beware type situation, but I just really don't support somebody coming in, redoing a house, getting it listed, and then selling it, and in the future having somebody else saddled with those requirements.
As I understand it, in the city of Newport Beach, that
you
when
don't
it's
get any
when it's
protection.
landmark, it doesn't provide any protection for the house.
But would you feel differently if it were Frank Lloyd Wright?
he's obviously over 30 years ago.
Well, I don't know that, are you defining something that's historically and artistically and culturally significant doesn't necessarily have to be 100 years old. We can create a masterpiece today, and it may take us a few years to recognize that, but that doesn't mean that it's not a masterpiece simply because it's not old. We'd have to throw out a whole bunch of art and stuff in that case.
I guess when I look at the picture of this, I'm not looking at a masterpiece.
That's your opinion.
That's my opinion. I realize that.
Mr. Hinn?
Yeah, I just have a question. Does the classification of this as a Class 1 or a Class 2 affect its ability to be listed on the National Historic or the National Register of Historic Buildings?
No, it does not.
So as far as I can tell, there's no practical impact one way or another, whether this is listed as a Class 1 or a Class 2?
No.
Okay.
I would point to one building that is in my district on West Cliff, in which it's shown in our list as I think a Class 2 building, that the property owner is pulling his hair out because of the requirements that preservationists are coming out of the woodwork and asking him to do on his particular property. He has a stairwell that was termite-ridden and fell down. He removed it, and the preservationists are now saying, you illegally removed my stairs, or the stairs, and have destroyed the character of the building. So
I would counter that with, if he had bought it and it had that classification, he would have gone in maybe with his eyes open. What has happened for him is he bought something that had no classification, and after he owned it, architects said, oh, this is an important building, and now he is getting caught. This way, anybody buying this house will know that it has some historical significance or major historical significance, and that they will be perhaps a little bit curtailed, and they'll be more careful in changing it. So I don't support the motion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Is there any other member of the audience who'd like to speak on this matter? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council. Councilmember Webb has offered a motion to approve this with the change from classification 1 to classification 2. Please vote.
With Councilmember Gardner voting no, the motion carries.
Thank you. Next item is oral reports from city council members on committee activities. Councilmember Daigle.
Yes, speaking again of the airport, the city is going to be finally receiving our air quality report. We had a consultant go out and examine and test if there's any particulate matter above certain levels coming from aircraft. So those results will be presented to the Citizens Aviation Committee Monday the 27th. And its significance, too, is because the cornerstone of our strategy on controlling growth at John Wayne Airport has been environmental impacts, noise, and so if we can add air quality to our list, we're going to try to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gardner.
Yes, the Harbor Commission has a concern, as part of its mission, of course, is to preserve marine-related services around the bay, and it's pretty much of a catch-up reactive approach so far, which has been frustrating for them. And I suggested an approach where perhaps if the Commission could identify those marine services that are absolutely critical to the viability of our harbor. In other words, if you have to buy a sextant, do they still use sextants, Ed? If you have to buy a sextant, oh, well, all right.
A sextant is for marine navigation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, still, I assume people have to navigate. Anyway, whatever you have to buy. There's a lot of things you can just go, if they're in Costa Mesa or Santa Ana or someplace else, it doesn't matter. But then there are other things that are probably very important that you just don't get boats serviced if they're not there right on the water. So to identify those, and then from that we could create, and I have to thank Dana Smith, our assistant city manager, for helping with this, identify those needs, and then perhaps do better planning around our harbor. But they are perfectly amenable to it, but then we, as the Commission, wanted to know if that was agreeable with the Council to create a plan like that and bring it back to Council for review. So before I send them off marching. Is this like the Planning Commission is? I hope not. Is there any objection? Let me put it that way. Does anybody have any objection to the Harbor Commission doing this? All right, thank you.
They're free to come up with lists.
Thank you.
Mr. Witt.
I have none.
Mr. Selich.
None.
Mr. Rosansky.
None, thank you.
Mr. Hinn.
And none.
And I have none. We're now on public hearings, item 22. Review of the 2009-10 Community Development Block Grant, Consolidated Actual Performance Report. Staff is here. We have some other more perhaps substantive items further on in the agenda, so if there's not need for a long report, we don't need a long report, but Katie, please come to the podium. And
in order to shorten the report, basically HUD requires, in order for us to receive community development block grant funds on a year-to-year basis, that we undergo an extensive planning and evaluation process. The Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, or CAPER for short, serves as the city's report to HUD, detailing what the city accomplished with its CDBG funds in the last fiscal year. The city published a notice of the public review and comment period for the draft CAPER and the daily pilot in the city website. To date, staff has received no public comment on the document. Any comments received tonight during the public hearing would be incorporated into the final document prior to its submission to HUD, and that final due date is September 28th.
thank you. We'll deem the public hearing opened. Are there members of the audience who would like to speak on this matter? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the City Council for questions.
I have a question.
Councilmember Gardner has a question.
Hand numbered 7, community development objectives. Can you just clarify for me, we talk about we have achieved eliminating blight and blighting influence on almost 3,000 households. What, I mean, we don't have 3,000 blighted houses, I would think, in Newport Beach. So obviously this is a broader definition. Can you clarify that for me?
Yes, actually I'm going to invite our CDBG consultant up. This is Clint Whitehead. He'll answer that question for you.
Thank you.
Have you ever been in District 1?
That was a bit
I'm sorry,
inappropriate
it
for the
was
city
very-
manager to make that comment.
It did have to do with code enforcement, I would assume, and that's where most of our cases are, but I'll let the consultant refer to that. You finding it there? It's on handwritten 7?
Handwritten 7. I'm trying to see what that corresponds to. I believe that corresponds to the former code enforcement program that we partially funded with CDBG earlier in the 5-year period, so long ago that I hardly remember it. And we must have done very well because Newport Beach is a wonderful community with great housing.
There you go, something that works.
What does it mean?
Well, it means...
I mean, it's more encompassing. Yeah. Obviously, it's not a ramshackle house. We don't have 3,000 ramshackle houses. No. We obviously have things that we deal with. I just want some clarification.
It doesn't necessarily mean that the housing is substandard. It means that we inspected that number of houses during that period.
Thank you.
And
that's all I want to know.
The cause of those inspections is varied.
Thank you.
Motion?
I move the motion.
I move the recommended action.
Motion second. Any further discussion? Thank you. Please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Item 23, Coastal Land Use Plan Consistency Amendment. Mr. Campbell.
Mayor Curry and members
public hearing on this.
Yes, Mayor Curry and members of the City Council. This is really a follow-up item to what we did last summer. If you recall, back in July of last year, we brought back to the City Council modifications to the Coastal Land Use Plan, which stemmed from amending our Coastal Land Use Plan due to the General Plan update of 2006. Within that effort, the City Council, the Planning Commission, the Coastal Commission did not accept and made 55 or 52 suggested recommendations to our Coastal Land Use Plan. The Council in July actually accepted all those changes, and what this amendment here is tonight is, in essence, making the general plan consistent with those changes. So there are 6 identified general plan amendments. There's a Charter 423 analysis that tracks the increases in development intensity and density and traffic trips, and that's provided in the staff report. And these are all minor amendments, and no vote of the electors is required. I can show you the individual properties if you like, but if you have any questions, I'm available.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Campbell? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Campbell. Let me invite any member of the audience who would like to speak on this matter. Please come forward. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close. Yes, ma'am. Please come forward. Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Carol McDermott. I'm representing the Kirchie family regarding the property on the Lido Peninsula. You'll recall that they have owned that property for over 60 years, and there is a slight mapping error on one portion of this exhibit that refers to their property, and it is map number 2 of the Lido McFadden mixed-use area. And while they have long held entitlement on this site, and it's always been the intent of the zoning and the general plan update to ensure that no property rights were lost. In fact, mixed use was recommended to the Coastal Commission, and the Coastal Commission removed that mixed use designation. And so we have a long-standing mobile home park out there of manufactured housing, as well as the boatyard and other commercial activities. And on behalf of John L. Kirchie and the rest of his family, I just would like to make sure that as part of the record, and I'm sure that Mr. Campbell will confirm, that it's important that that map be clarified so that there is no unintended consequences of a mapping error as relates to this very fine piece of property. So we'd appreciate perhaps if he has any clarification he'd like to add, but we'd like to have the adoption of this with the understanding that that map will be clarified and that that boundary is somewhat conceptual because there is no legal description that describes the outline of that area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Does that mean that we would have to go back to the Coastal Commission?
No, I don't believe so.
Mr. Campbell?
The answer to that, I will confirm no. This is really the map for statistical area B5 attached to the resolution, which shows the mobile home park. And I have to apologize, I don't see the handwritten page.
Is it handwritten 28, I think?
28?
62.
62? Okay, that's not on my copy, I apologize. And you should see the magenta and the brown colors. And what we're referring to here is really the 217 dwelling units in the mobile home park on the peninsula.
And what is the error again?
Well, the error in this case is really the boundary of that mobile home park. It was drawn based on an aerial photograph. It was not an exact boundary. There's no legal description of the mobile home park. And I can tell on one instance the office building that's really associated with the marina management, which is really the magenta color on that map, is actually would be depicted within this brown color. So what we want to do is we need to look at that boundary a little more closely and maybe adjust that boundary so that the unintended consequence we want to eliminate is that the existing commercial uses within the designated residential need not be caught or made non-conforming by this action. And so what we would do is maybe adjust that boundary around that building, and that should be that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. Mine's all black.
But this isn't contradicting in any way what the Coastal Commission
No,
set up.
not at all. Not at all.
Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing portion, bring it back to the council. Is there a motion?
I move the recommended action with the not add, but it's a clarification of mapping and that since there isn't a formal legal description that the boundary is, I don't know what the proper words are, but without a legal description, you would need to have, this is approximate, let's put it that way, and can be interpreted.
That's exactly how I would look at it, yes.
All right, David, do you want to say something about that?
I'm just trying to make sure that the council's action is clear, and if what you're doing is essentially approving the amendment, which is depicted in the map, and you need to know what that map's going to say when you actually depict it. If what you're saying is all we're going to say is what you just said, that the boundary is not clear, approximate and the boundary is not clear, this is for representation purposes only, and so we don't bind on that. I understand that, and that's...
As long as I understand, the goal is to address this issue for Mr. Kirchie appropriately.
Oh, yeah, we can. We just need to make sure that the council's action is clear and binding, and I want to make sure this accomplishes the goal of the general plan amendment.
What I might suggest is that we can add that language just describing the nature of the exhibit to the resolution the language that just indicated that the boundary that's depicted on that map is approximate, and that existing commercial uses are intended to be located within the marine commercial designation and the residential uses within the residential designation. I think we can add that language right to the resolution on the exhibit, Exhibit A to that resolution, and add that language tonight.
That's what I said.
Okay.
Okay, is everybody clear?
Then that's clear, and that can be actioned upon, and the resolution will be presented to you as amended.
Any further discussion on this matter?
I need a second.
I second. Okay. Please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Item 24, Newport Commerce Plaza Plan Community Development Plan Amendment.
Rush Bunham from the Planning Department will make this presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Russell Bunham with the Planning Department. This is the public hearing for the Newport Commerce Plaza project. As you may recall from the council hearing the last time we were here, a city ordinance requires 2 readings and a public hearing, so this is going to serve as the public hearing and the second reading for the ordinance. This is the project near the airport area that will change the land use designation in the plan community text from industrial site number 4 to office site number 9, which would be consistent with the general plan. It would also change the parking requirement in Newport Commerce Plaza from 1 space for every 250 square feet to 1 space for every 281 square feet, which would allow for all of the buildings in Commerce Plaza to be occupied with office uses. And the third thing that the ordinance would allow for would be the provision in the Newport Place Plan Community that would require the planning director's review of the proposed on-site parking layout in Newport Commerce Plaza. Staff is available if we have any questions.
Thank you. And this has been appropriately noticed?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right. Are there questions for staff? Seeing none, this is second reading. Are there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on this matter? All right. Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the council.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move the action as recommended by staff.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
With Mayor Pro Tem Hen absent, the motion carries.
Thank you.
And
next-
also, I just wanted to thank one thing. I know some of my colleagues, if it's okay, visited the site. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, item 25, Code Amendment Interim Study Overlay for the Newport Beach Winery proposed at 869 West 16th Street.
Mr. Mayor, before we get into this,
Rosansky.
I rent a property within 500 feet of this location, so I'm going to excuse myself from the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Rosansky. So noted. Mr. Campbell.
Mayor Curry and members of the City Council, this is a code amendment to apply the interim study overlay and to approve a study plan to allow food processing at the subject property, which is located up on 16th Street at 869 West 16th Street. The applicant is proposing to provide a small winery in one of the existing industrial buildings, and the interim study overlay process is the process that we use to implement the general plan while we're updating the zoning code. And so approval of this item today would allow food processing at that subject property. The winery would be allowed, and it would be there in advance of the zoning code, which it might be out there a few weeks before the zoning code is adopted. If the council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The applicant is available.
Thank you.
If you have any questions.
All right, any questions for Mr. Campbell? All right, our second winery, we are the budding Napa of Orange County here, it looks like. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this matter? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing and bring it back. Is there a motion?
I move the recommended action.
Second.
Please vote.
With Councilmember Rosansky recusing himself, the motion carries.
Okay.
We may have a third. I harvested my wild grapes and made wine. It's aging as we speak.
I can hardly wait.
Is that permitted in that zone?
We'll have the blessing of the harvest. Congratulations. Good luck.
Bathtub gin might work.
Next item is item 26, the Hoag Memorial Hospital Development Agreement Annual Compliance Review. Mr. Campbell, you're a busy man tonight.
Yeah, we are busy tonight. Tonight is the continued public hearing with regards to Hoag Hospital. As the council may recall, back on April 27th, we started the public hearing process, and we were reviewing Hoag for consistency with the development agreement. And the council at the time felt that the Hoag was in good faith compliance with the terms of the development agreement, except for a couple of small areas. And in reality, it's the loading dock mitigation, and there was some questions and concerns about the cogen plant operation. The development agreement requires that Hoag curtail the energy there to reduce the plume. We had a second public hearing, which was continued to tonight, for Hoag to provide additional information for the council, which I've discussed in the staff report here. We have a noise compliance report which suggests that they are consistent with the Planned Community Text noise standards. We've got additional information regarding the energy plant curtailment and plume reduction, so there's some additional information for the council to consider. And we do find, as well as a noise mitigation plan for the loading dock. And I'll get to that in a moment. But on the first two items, we do feel that Hoag is in good faith substantial compliance. And when we get to the loading dock, we were dealing with two mitigation measures. The first necessitated putting up some noise panels up on the side of the loading dock to help the sound from bouncing off the building and going back to Villa Balboa. Now, those have been subsequently been installed. And the second item is really related to the enclosure of the baler and the enclosure of the trash compactor. Now, what Hoag is suggesting to do now, rather than actually perform that project, and it might help for me to give you a little bit of why that mitigation measure came about, because when we did the amendment to the development agreement in 2007, Hoag was envisioning building a building right on top of the loading dock area, which then had them repurposing that entire space and reconfiguring the entire loading dock. And at that time, they had envisioned doing all the improvements that were then reflected in the mitigation measure. And as you may know, we've reported at the prior meetings that Hoag is not planning on building the south building anymore, and it's on indefinite hold. And so repurposing the entire loading dock area and reconfiguring it was not necessarily on their highest priority list, but that didn't relieve them of the requirement to do these things. So what Hoag is suggesting to do is to enclose the baler, which is a small piece of equipment, with noise attenuating panels consistent with the mitigation measure, so we feel we're in good faith compliance there. Now, with the trash compactor, it's a little bit different. They're looking to do a partial enclosure around the equipment that actually does the compacting, but then leave the bin open air. The purpose of that is just to allow the bin enough space to get up onto the truck. It's a roll-off bin, if you will. And actually, we do believe that that will provide some noise attenuation. We also were looking at this as an interim compliance measure, so that when Hoag actually does rebuild on the upper campus and does repurpose or reconfigure that loading dock, then we would be revisiting this question at a future review, and Hoag would be then required to fully enclose these items to further mitigate the noise. So ultimately, we do feel that they're in good faith substantial compliance on an interim basis, and that's our recommendation here this evening. Hoag is available here to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Councilmember Gardner.
A question about the roll-off bin. Is that, I mean, the trash compactor makes a certain kind of noise. I'm assuming the roll-off bin also makes noise. Is it going to be a question of we're not really helping the situation because the roll-off bin is the one that makes all the noise and the trash compactor doesn't? I have no idea. That is a genuine question, not a rhetorical one where I already know the answer.
Okay. The compacting units do make noise, and so the partial enclosure around the compactor should attenuate that noise. Now, the bin, yes, there will be the truck that comes in and it idles and you pull the bin up and it does make some noise. It's very typical of other loading dock
How many
operations.
times a day?
You know, Hoag's going to have to answer that question.
Okay.
I don't know.
So anyway, perhaps the applicant could answer that question. And also just the interim period. To me, interim is not infinite.
Yes.
And I know that at this point, I don't know whether they have the plans in place as to when they think this might be, but if they could cast some light on what the interim period would be, and as I say, the roll-off bin, how many times a day that particular noise is in action.
Well, we'll be revisiting the compliance question every April for the entire development agreement, and we'll obviously be looking at this over time. And so if it becomes more of a permanent condition, then we can advise Hoag that that's not acceptable to move forward. But I think Hoag can answer better than I about when they might plan to do it.
All right.
Jim, wasn't this a condition of the construction of the second tower and not a condition of the other work they were doing?
Well, it's a little bit of both, because if you recall, we had noise compliance issues with the loading dock. And so this was to address existing noise. And as you also recall, we built a sound wall, or Hogue built a sound wall between. And that sound wall is helping mitigate a lot of the vehicle noise from the loading dock. And so that is one of the reasons why the interim compliance is we feel is an appropriate determination today. But it was existing noise and future noise. And that's the other reason why we don't want to eliminate this condition, because there will be additional activity at that loading dock as Hogue builds out. They still have several 100,000 square feet to build. They do intend eventually possibly to build buildings on the upper campus. And with increased activity, we want to have the ability to enclose these features in the future as noise does increase, and we can monitor that on a yearly basis.
Thank you. Please come forward, state your name.
Good evening. My name is Sanford Smith. I'm the Senior Vice President for Real Estate Facilities for Hogue Hospital. To answer the question on the frequency that the roll-off bin, it's collected 3 times per week. And to address the question on the anticipated timing for the construction, at the present time we have no plans to remove the south building and to build a tower. So we would anticipate that the current loading dock would remain in its current configuration for the foreseeable future.
That, as I say, that to me is stretching the definition of interim probably. But Jim, you say that we still have regular annual checks where if it proved to be still too noisy for some reason, we would have some further action we could take?
Definitely. Every April we do a development agreement review, and part of that review we require Hogue to have a consultant prepare a noise compliance report. And so I think the first step would be as if there's a violation of the noise provisions, and I think we would look to what that source is, and if it is this particular piece of equipment, I think the interim status ought to be revoked, and we ought to be looking for that to be constructed or implemented. So we have this every year to look at it.
Thank you. Are there members of the public who would like to speak on this matter? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Dick Runyon. I'm from the Villa Balboa complex adjacent to the Hogue Hospital. I'd like to quickly speak to 3 or 4 items. First, I'd like to ask that the council consider asking Hogue to be more expedient in its delivery of the data to the council. We've been, as you know, in this process for 5 months now, and the annual hearing has turned out to be sort of every other month continued. We would hope that we could ask Hogue to be prepared to prepare these items in advance so that the community could have access to them rather than spreading these out over multiple months. It has been 5 months now. I'd also like to urge the council to embrace the principle of transparency in the manner in which Hogue makes data available to demonstrate its compliance with the development agreement. I'd like to request that the council consider asking Hogue to deliver the documents to be considered for the annual review at least 60 days prior to the date of the scheduled hearing, and simultaneously to make copies of that data available to the community. We've been getting access to the data when we get access to it, if any, a week before, which gives us no opportunity to have the data professionally analyzed. Members of the community aren't competent to do that. I know the council has much more experience in this than members of the community, but we would like to have that opportunity so that we can make competent and knowledgeable commentary to the report that's being presented by Hogue. This is the only way the community is going to have available the documents to make knowledgeable comments at the scheduled hearing date. The timely access is particularly critical if we're to be able to have an analysis that's comparable to what the planning department will be offered, and we're prepared to do so professionally. We think it's to the council's advantage to have multiple observations rather than just a single observation, much of which is prepared by Hogue and submitted without other independent review. You just heard some issues on noise levels. I'd also like to make the following request with regard to testing the noise levels. That the dates of those tests be announced 60 days prior to the date scheduled to allow members of the community to attend and to be accompanied by professional assistants to monitor that process. Weather conditions, especially at the cogen plant, can make substantial differences in the measurements of the sound levels. If the community so chooses, we would also like to have the opportunity to conduct independent noise level measurements at our expense. Regarding the lower campus, which I know wasn't the subject for this evening, but is still an issue of concern, there are structures and storage facilities down there that are no longer temporary in nature. Some have been in place for an excess of 5 years and are not in compliance with the development agreement with regard to architecture and color. We'd also request that the council bring all lower campus structures and facilities into compliance with the development agreement, including consistence of the color thing. We'd also like to have more consistent monitoring and compliance beyond the period immediately preceding the annual hearing. As of this morning, there were multiple trash items spread around the outside of the green screen facing the community park above the lower campus parking. And finally, the request that our community continues to be concerned about. We would request that the council establish an independent review of the lower campus parking lights to determine a way to cease the wasteful practice of lighting the entire parking lot when it's not in use. And that includes the hours every evening from 8 to 5 a.m., 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., and entire nights on weekends when there is not one soul in the parking lot. And if there's concern about others coming in the parking lot, that could be solved with a simple gate, very similar to the one on the northern part of campus. It would keep cars out of there at night. But there's not a soul parking in that lot at night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Are there other speakers on this topic? Please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Eric Thurner. I'm a resident of Villa Balboa and live in a unit adjacent to the cogen plant. I just wanted to amplify and expand a little bit on one of the requests that Dick Runyon just made regarding the provision of data. Specifically, the development agreement included the implementation of a protocol to reduce the plume from the cooling towers of the cogen plant. The protocol calls for certain mitigation measures to be put in place when weather conditions are right for creation of the plume. The report that was included in the packet that was made available to the public a few days ago, or actually a few weeks ago, consisted essentially of a letter from Hoag saying we are taking certain steps to comply with the protocol. There was some very small amount of detail given, but nothing really that allows the public to identify and assess how the protocol is being implemented. Specifically, what we'd like to have would be some kind of a moderately detailed report that shows the date and times that the protocol is implemented, and maybe some just basic information on the weather conditions that are present at that time, temperature and humidity, and then something that indicates what mitigation measure was actually taken. Was the load shifted to the upper campus, or was some other measure taken? The advantage of having this would be twofold. First, it would just promote transparency. It would allow residents and city to see that Hoag is actually following the protocol. But perhaps more important, it would allow the residents to do some kind of an independent assessment of how effective the protocol actually is. We can collect observational data through a video camera connected to a hard drive to monitor the plume, and then later when we get this data on the implementation of the protocol, we can compare it to that data and see, did the plume decrease, did it go away, what happened. And certainly I would think the City Council and certainly the residents would want to know how well this protocol is actually working. If it is working, great, everybody will feel better about it. If it's not, or if it's of limited effectiveness, then that would serve as a starting point, perhaps, to look at how we could improve it or enhance the protocol. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing portion, bring it back to the City Council for action. Mr. Rosansky?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Curry. With regard to the loading dock and the improvements there, I know Hoag and the city staff have been working on this for about 5 months. And I guess I've come to the conclusion that they have made a good faith effort in trying to remediate the situation there. I think that looking back when we negotiated this agreement and some of the mitigation measures that were called for at the time, I know that, for instance, like the sound wall was kind of thrown in there at the last minute as, hey, maybe we can do this, and Hoag said, yeah, we could do that. And so the sound wall seems to have taken up the vast majority of the burden of controlling sound emanating from Hoag's campus, at least in that particular area. And I think with these further improvements to the baler and the trash compactor, it'll only serve to lessen the impact on the adjoining property owners. So, granted, their plans have changed. I personally, I don't think that they'll be building that building within the time frame of this development agreement. So, most likely, every time we see this in April, it'll probably be monitoring the compliance of.
And I'll be complaining about the use of the word interim.
Yeah, there you go. But I'm convinced that they have made a good faith effort to try and work with the city staff in coming up with a plan, which is what I had asked for, to remediate this solution or this situation. So I'll move the recommended action by staff.
Motion, is there a second? Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
I have a question regarding the request here for information to be presented and whatnot. Are there any protocol requirements in the agreement that call for when information is to be submitted and that sort of thing?
Councilmember Hannon, no, the development agreement doesn't provide any specific details other than the review has to occur in April, which 60 days in advance, we're only going to get half of the reporting period's weather station data, if you will. So we're only going to be looking at half of the reporting period on the plume mitigation if we did that. So, what I've asked Hoag to do is basically submit it to me roughly 60 days in advance, maybe more like March 1st, if you will. So we do have it fairly early, and there is no reason why that information can't be reviewed when that information comes in. So it just provides enough time for staff to evaluate it. So,
and that can be shared?
Yes,
absolutely. So the public can contact you if they want to see the information that you're looking at. It seems to me that that's a very reasonable way to approach this, rather than place even more burdens on Hoag here in terms of.
What I will do is I will put something in my calendar to make sure I call Mr. Runyon and Mr. Thurner on that when I get that information. I'll just make it available the day that I get it from Hoag.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, no further discussion. Please vote.
I just want to add that with the parking lot, if you can, energy, if we can save energy, it's great. And you may not want a black parking lot, but perhaps you can turn off some of the lights or something and still have the safety you want and yet meet some of their needs as well.
Thank you.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Item 27, Morningside Recovery Development Agreement. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With your permission, I'd like to utilize the podium for this presentation. My office is making the presentation with respect to the development agreement in Morningside. I'd like to touch on briefly the history of what got us here. I'll touch on the terms of the agreement. I'll also touch on the questions we have received with respect to the agreement since the Planning Commission hearing. But briefly and historically, as this council and certainly the public knows, since approximately 2005, the city has been working to do its best to balance the needs of its residential communities with the needs of the disabled within the city of Newport Beach. In 2008, the council passed an ordinance to attempt to achieve that issue. That ordinance has been subject to litigation. There was a disagreement between Morningside and the city as to the applicability of the ordinance to the Morningside facilities, and this agreement is the end product of a resolution that was begun back in the early part of this year when the council approved the settlement agreement, saying we would negotiate a development agreement to carry out the settlement. So here tonight is the opportunity for the council to receive public testimony and public hearing, to consider the development agreement, which is called a zoning agreement, this document. It's a public benefit development agreement and zoning agreement, to consider whether or not it in fact achieves the ends of the council and meets the needs of the community as well as balancing the interests of the disabled. And if you take action tonight, your action will be to introduce an ordinance which would adopt the development agreement, so it would be first reading, and then you would pass it on to second reading on September 28th for final adoption should you choose to take that action. So that's the historical context in which we're moving forward. This development
Excuse me,
agreement-
David. So there will be another opportunity for public input at the council meeting on September the 28th.
Yes, there will.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Now, this development agreement addresses the operation of Morningside Recovery. They've had numerous facilities throughout the city. At this point in time, the development agreement enters into a limitation on the caps of number of clients and client beds that Morningside can provide services to for the disabled. The cap is 36 citywide and 30 within the peninsula zone. If you look at this chart here, it's also in the staff report and the attachments. The peninsula zone is actually outlined. It's difficult to see, but it's outlined in this area. There may be 30 client beds and 30 clients that are served by Morningside Recovery in that area. Now, it identifies and calls out numerous locations in which those client beds are currently set, and the locations of those are actually begun on, hopefully on the next slide. Well, that's, if we go further on, okay, we'll see that one set of locations exist on River, Imaloa, 39th Street, and the next set of locations exists back on Lido Isle with respect to a triplex that has been placed on Lido Isle. Now, I'd like to briefly address how these locations came about. The locations that are reflected specifically on the peninsula are historical locations of Morningside. Since we began processing this development agreement in the early part of the year, apparently plans came forward to potentially move some of those locations. After the Planning Commission held its hearings in June, the location that exists on Lido Isle was vacated by Sober Living by the Sea. It is a triplex on Lido Isle and Via del Sud, and that was vacated effective July 31st by Sober Living by the Sea, where they had operated a facility that provided for the needs of the disabled there at the time. After that, with no transfer of rights or no direct negotiations as we understand it that happened between Morningside entered into a lease agreement with the owner of that property and was contemplating moving into that location. So that was after the Planning Commission had heard it. We received notice of it. Originally, this matter was set for hearing by the City Council in the beginning part of August. As a result of the potential move, and since under the agreement, Morningside would have the opportunity to move, we noticed that location at the same time to make sure that the residents of Lido Isle had the best possible notice we could give them as to the potential of their Morningside locating a facility there pursuant to the development agreement. That gave Lido Isle the knowledge with respect to it, and we've had meetings with Lido Isle residents since then. We continued that hearing from August to this hearing in order to complete the negotiations with Morningside. Now, since the June Planning Commission meeting, we have been in negotiations with Morningside to address the issues raised by the Planning Commission, and I will work us through those differences. Now, historically, we have essentially three sets of data to take a look at. Now, this is a very difficult chart to read, but the Council has before it that chart in hard copy as well as a number that are outside on the desk, I believe. And please forgive me. Don't mind the different colors. It's different people had comments on it, and I didn't catch that before we actually printed it. There's no significance of the different colors other than that they were written by other people. So if we look at the principles that we're facing, we have what the city could require under its ordinance that was passed in 2008. We have the sober living agreement that was entered into back in 2009. Then we have the actual agreement with Morningside that's listed, and we're dealing with a number of different factors that exist there. So I will work us through this so that the Council and the public sees the distinctions between these agreements and limitations. Bed count, with respect to this issue for Morningside, there's no limit under our ordinance. Under the Sober Living by the Sea, they were operating at 204, and they had come to the agreement to reduce to 156, and are in that process now. They were then operating 12 client beds on Lido Isle at that time. Under the Morningside agreement, they've agreed to a 36 citywide, 30 within the peninsula zone, as we discussed. Now, If we look at, had they gone forward simply with ADP licenses, which is the next line down, that's the 6 and unders types of licenses, and you look at what restrictions, if any, Morningside would have had, for that matter, Sober Living by the Sea, under licensing, and what they could do. Under the city's ordinance, under state law, Morningside could open any licensed facility, 6 and under. Anywhere in the city, we could not regulate it. But under the Sober Living by the Sea agreement, as under the Morningside agreement, both of these operators have accepted a cap we could not otherwise enforce under state law or under our ordinance. So this is a limitation significantly beyond state law that they've accepted. The reference to California Health and Safety Code section only deals with the fire code applications to these types of residential uses, and it's an issue that's enforced by our fire marshal. The third line down is the ADP license 7 or unders. If we look at those and compare what could have accomplished under the different laws, existing uses could have been applied for as a use permit, and there would be no new cap could apply. So under the ordinance, they could apply for a use permit in an MFR zone, and they could process it. They could have applied for a use permit under our ordinance had they done it within a year for their existing facilities, but that did not happen. But what has effectively occurred, Sober Living by the Sea capped their bed count, as did Morningside, regardless of the use permit. So we could not have enforced a cap throughout the city as to Morningside, but they have accepted a cap of 36 and 30, as I've talked about, which we could not have done under our ordinance for 7 and overs, excuse me. As far as unlicensed sober living homes, again, existing could apply for a use permit without a cap. Existing would now apply in MFR zones. Again, we have a bed cap, which we could not otherwise enforce. With respect to documents and approval types that would work, now this is an issue that's of concern to the public, and we've received numerous different comments regarding what processes. Under our ordinance, it envisions the use of use permits to give a time that people could utilize the facilities for sober living indefinitely. In other words, there's no time limit under a use permit. There are also issues regarding reasonable accommodation applications, and there is a process for that. Under our current, the Sober Living by the Sea situation, as well as the Morningside situation, the development agreement allows for a certain number of beds. Here again, Morningside for 30 and 30 up to 36. For a time limit of only 25 years is circumscribed largely because of our charter, and so it's not an indefinite time. A use permit would have been indefinite. Now, since the Planning Commission meeting, we have the issue of beds. The Planning Commission made the recommendation after receiving public testimony that beds be tied to client uses. That's been updated in the agreement, and Morningside has accepted that update. So actually refers to clients and client beds, which makes for easier and more clarification so that enforcement can be applied more simply and gets rid of the confusion regarding occupied beds. There's another issue that comes up in these questions, and that's what we call dispersion, dispersing the different facilities. With respect to distancing between facilities, under our current ordinance, our hearing officer can require dispersion based upon the hearing officer's factual findings. There are no hard guidelines that have to be enforced. It's a factual determination on a case-by-case basis. But he does apply the guidelines that came out of ADP and out of the HUD departments. So there's no specific dispersion guidelines that can be enforced under the ordinance, but under the development agreements, and both of them, in fact, but for listed exceptions, there is dispersion requirements. Let me briefly address those. The current locations that are being utilized by Morningsides do not meet, not all of them, do not meet the dispersion requirements under the agreement. The way the agreement is drafted is to identify those locations that currently may operate at their locations. Then the dispersion requirements affect any new location Morningside may wish to come into. Let me try and clarify. Since the cap is only focused on clients and client beds, Morningside has the freedom under the ordinance, and which you will adopt if you do for the development agreement, to move those. When they move after the development agreement has been adopted, they must comply with the dispersion requirements that are set forth in Article 3. Currently, what the development agreement does is identify the locations they will be allowed to based upon the hearings by the City Council, to operate, and in the future, the dispersion requirements will apply. And many of the locations meet the dispersion requirements, but for example, the LIDO Isle facility is a triplex. That's one facility, and therefore, there are arguments about that. That's not the issue for us. It's actually being made so that it can be functioning in there, and it is one facility pursuant to our agreement. Now, other approved locations with respect to this issue, Sober Living by the Sea has approved locations. We've identified specific approved locations for Morningside. Those are the specific approved locations that Morningside can operate on unless they change those locations, and all new locations would have to meet the dispersion requirements. We have required staffing that's not otherwise available under the ordinance or the law. And the staffing for Morningside is a qualified on-site manager or a 24-hour hotline call, and is provided for in the operating conditions. As the issue of gender-specific locations, we have not addressed that in the development agreement. We can tell the people on Lido Isle that it's our information that Morningside has entered into a lease with the owner of that facility, and that's a gender-specific location where there will be women served, at least at this point in time, while they're still under the lease. We've been able to, Morningside has agreed to quiet hours that are better addressed than under, it's not addressed at all under our ordinance. They're better than the Sober Living by the Sea agreement. The quiet hours are from 9 p.m. until 8 a.m. Government referrals is also a major change with respect to the operating conditions. Government referrals under our ordinance is restricted. The operators may only have one probationer or one parolee. We have, Morningside has made significant agreement with us with respect to limiting also that they may not have certified gang members who have to actually report. They have agreed that they may not have certified sex offenders, and they won't take people referred under Proposition 36. Now, we appreciate that agreement from Morningside. I would also assure, however, the community that Morningside has made it clear that those don't generally fall within their service or clientele, but they've agreed now that they would never take them even if that became an opportunity. There are protections under the operating conditions dealing with secondhand smoke, parking in client vehicles, client transportation routes, deliveries, clients per bedrooms, I'll go to reporting frequency, but all of those are covered by the operating conditions and restrictions. Those are better under the operating conditions and restrictions and give us more enforcement tools than we would have had under our ordinance in all probability, and if we have them with certainty now since we're also settling the litigation. Reporting frequency. I would like to talk briefly about enforcement. That's been an issue that's been raised in the public hearings involved. Since the Planning Commission hearing, we've negotiated with Morningside, and Morningside has agreed that they will be providing quarterly compliance reports. There will be an annual review before the City Council regarding compliance, as with all development agreements. We've also been able to update and clarify the enforcement provisions so that the city has essentially all access to its administrative citations, its police powers, and the possibility of specific performance and writs of mandate in the civil court to enforce this. This was a concern by the citizens at the time of the Planning Commission. It was a comment by the Planning Commission, and we've been able to negotiate with Morningside to clarify and enhance those potential protections for the city. And that deals with the enforcement and the violations. Now, I want to briefly deal with the other questions that were raised with public comments that we've heard. We've been in active discussions with as many people who have been commenting. But let me thank the public as well. To make this type of process work, it's very helpful for us to receive your comments. So one, we can address them, and that's what happened after the Planning Commission. Staff took those comments to heart and met with Morningside, and Morningside was amenable to addressing those issues, and we were able to come up with, I believe, to be a better agreement. So thank you to the public and to the Planning Commission for those comments. And thank you again also for the comments we've received today and since the actual negotiations took place. There are essentially 7 different questions that have been raised. One is related to facilities. In effect, the commenters concerned about existing facilities potentially violates our integral facilities definition and dispersal requirements. As I've indicated, the zoning agreement is set up that identifies approved locations at this time, and then the balance of any new facilities that they're moved to would need to comply with our dispersion requirements. Another commenter raised the issue of assemblies and asked for further restrictions on assemblies. At this point in time, we don't see that as necessary, but we appreciate that concern. The operating conditions provide that when there are assemblies in a public space, it specifically addresses compliance with city laws, and we believe that is an effective tool for enforcing our laws, not just our laws, but also pursuant to the operating conditions. With respect to another commenter raised the question of due process. Since there has been a change of locations or addition of locations since the Planning Commission, I wish to assure the public and the council that due process concerns have been met. There's no requirement of the government code nor under our ordinance to notice the type of change that has actually happened and send it back to the Planning Commission. We made every effort to give immediate notice to the public when we learned of the potential change by posting the sites. They've had the opportunity, and we've met with Lido Isle. Due process has been provided, but we certainly understand their concerns. There were questions regarding certification of compliance or certificates of compliance. I would note that Exhibit 3, which is another one of the exhibits in our PowerPoint, actually addresses that. It's been improved and enhanced since the Planning Commission meeting. If you take a look at it, which I'm sure the public can't read, but it's actually in the staff report. If you take a note, yes, we have a matrix that just deals with beds and client beds, but if you go further down, there's a certification statement at the last paragraph that deals with, on that page and going over, that they're in compliance with all of the operating conditions of the development agreement and its conditions. I will also give the public the assurance that our office is involved in the enforcement. We're working through the enforcement issues related to sober living by the sea and preparing the first development agreement compliance report. We are creating a matrix for all operating conditions, and we'll be reporting on compliance on all operating conditions for every annual review. So I believe we've addressed that concern. There's been a question asked regarding clarification of what happens when an operator vacates a facility. Does the right remain at that facility? What essentially occurs is this agreement is in the nature of a personal right that belongs to Morningside. It allows Morningside to operate a certain number of client beds. If they remove them from a facility, then those client beds have been removed. Now, the concept is that they can utilize those elsewhere within the city as their locations have been modified. If they've done that, they've chosen another location. Then to return to the previous, then it would be our interpretation that they've abandoned the previous location, and that next, if they want to go back to the previous location, they would need to go through the compliance issues pursuant to the development agreement of dispersion and other issues like that. They must comply with the development agreement requirements. So abandonment would happen when they've utilized the beds elsewhere within the community. And number 6 was...
David, that wouldn't increase the number of beds.
No, it would not. It would shift the beds from one location to another. And that's one of the main components and benefits of the agreement. We are limiting the number of beds and, in fact, reducing the number of operation beds that Morningside's agreed to and formerly operated. There's another clause in the agreement that deals with the opportunity for Morningside to acquire 7 and over licensed facilities. Now, let me make that clear what that is. Morningside's cap is 36 beds and client beds within the city. The clause goes on to say that it may acquire existing permitted 7 and over facilities, and that goes beyond their cap. Now, what's meant by that is there are 3 facilities in the Peninsula Zone that are existing 7 and over. Why do we use 7 and over? Because 6 and under are not subject to our permitting. State law and federal law will not allow us to affect those. They may be licensed, and we're not allowed to affect those. But if they're licensed at 7 and over, they also have rights. There are 3 existing facilities on the peninsula that could potentially be acquired by Morningside. They total a number of 41 beds if they acquired them. They are between 11 and maybe 16 beds that are currently licensed and permitted by the city. So they went through the administrative process and they are permitted. Under the agreement, under the development agreement, Morningside could acquire a facility, and that would not violate its cap. Now, the rationale here is that the goal was to limit and reduce, in order to protect our residential neighborhoods, the number of providers that provide within our areas so we don't degrade our residential neighborhood and provide a better experience for the disabled who are living in Newport Beach. This doesn't change the number of beds. If they acquire an existing permitted facility, the number of beds on the peninsula doesn't change. So the goals of the development agreement are still met. The questions can be asked, what happens if they then either change beds and such? Well, the cap remains the same under the agreement, which is 30 and 36. Let's say they acquire a 12 somewhere on the peninsula, which takes them up to 42 beds on the peninsula. It doesn't change their cap. It just allows them to operate that other facility. The next question that rightfully asked, and I suspect you will hear it tonight, is what happens if they keep that facility, but they let go another 6 and under? Well, they're still with the 36 citywide cap, 30 operating on the peninsula, but they can operate that facility they acquired for 12, so it's ultimately going to reduce the amount they can operate, but doesn't change their cap they're entitled to under the development agreement. They can acquire other facilities, but that can't result in any more than a 41 change, because that's all the number of beds that are currently permitted on the peninsula. A very real question and a very astute question was asked, how does that affect the Sober Living by the Sea agreement? Sober Living by the Sea, if you recall, has what we call the most favored nation status agreement that's in their operating conditions. We cannot grant to any other operator an operating benefit that violates the most favored nation. When it comes to beds, pursuant to that agreement, we can't grant an operator 30%, more than 30% of what Sober Living by the Sea was operating at the time that they entered into the agreement. That's 61 beds. That can't be impacted with the number of beds that are currently on the peninsula. So we don't see that as having, in fact, any practical effect upon this clause. We don't believe it can have any effect based upon the current permitted status. But we recognize and appreciate the question. It's a very astute question. And I believe the other issues you're likely to hear tonight relate to enforcement and compliance. I hope I've already addressed those issues. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them further. I do believe there are other slides that one of the things that shows that the changes in actual uses that exist on the peninsula, if we have them, we were putting it together based upon comments we received. Yes, if we can go back. Now, what we need to keep this into historical context of is what it was before and what it is now. And you will hear a number of different estimates of how many beds were served on the peninsula. The city, through its best efforts, through investigation, put together the numbers and built these maps. So you'll see that as of 2007, we saw facilities here in this area, in the Upper Peninsula area. And right now, with the current development agreements, what you will see with the Sober Living by the Sea, Morningside, and other permitted uses, it's now pictured as such. The next one will show you Mid-Peninsula or Central Peninsula, which is now pictured as such. And the next one will show you, I believe, Lido Isle. Now, the Via Antibes was actually there under Sober Living by the Sea and is currently potentially operated, will potentially be operated by Morningside. And then the comparison for the City of Newport Beach's numbers, beds range from 447 to 791 in 2007 with 103 facilities. Today, beds for total approximately 197 beds in 19 different homes or duplexes and triplexes. So there has been a significant reduction with respect to these facilities. Not because we want to injure the rights of the disabled for housing, but because we want to protect our residential neighborhoods and because we want to provide a better experience for the disabled, because I think they're better served by being in a residential neighborhood where that environment has not been degraded. So unless you have any further questions, I certainly will be available, and then we would take public comment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt, for that comprehensive presentation. Are there any questions for Mr. Hunt at this time? All right, we're going to open the public hearing. How many of you all would like to speak on this topic today? I know many of you here speak or feel very deeply about this. All right, we're going to have, if you could, out of consideration of your colleagues, come briskly to the podium, speak succinctly, 3 minutes each, and we want to hear what you have to say. Please state your name as a beginning, please. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council and staff. I'm Ronald Talma. I'm one of the attorneys for Morningside. The other attorney is Mary Helen Beata-Picado, and we have worked extensively in the federal lawsuit and in the settlement reached there and in all the negotiations here. And I'm just here because the lawyer needs to be here for some reason or another. Candace Bruce is our CEO, and she is here. And it seems to me, rather than hearing from the lawyers, you might want to hear from her as it relates to the concerns of the neighbors. And you can either get her now or at the end, however you
Why don't we
would like
ask
her.
Ms. Bruce to come forward now, and then we'll hear from the residents' perspective here following that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Candace Bruce, CEO of Morningside Recovery.
Candace, move the microphone down a little bit, please. Thank you.
Is that better? Okay, thanks. I wanted to just address a couple of things. You know, I've been with Morningside Recovery for the last year, and during the course of that year, and coming on to Morningside, you know, I've done a lot of evaluation of what was currently, how Morningside was currently operating, both with our client base and in the community of Newport Beach. And during the course of this year, I've worked very closely with the city to try to resolve this issue and do it in a way that we can maintain relationships with our neighbors, both as residents as well as local businesses. I've spent a lot of time on staff training to improve our responses to neighbor complaints, or to look for proactive ways to improve the way we function within the city of Newport Beach. You know, I've gone through this agreement and made concessions that really cause our company to increase procedures and daily operations, increase expenses, and certainly limit our ability for growth in the city of Newport Beach. And my hope really is to find a resolution and to really kind of put this thing past and see about how we can move forward as a neighborly business. We encourage our staff and our clients to use local businesses and primarily the businesses around us. We think it's really important that we support these businesses, especially in this economy. And I hope you'll find that the concessions and compromises that we have made so far are, you know, beyond a goodwill gesture of our interest in working with our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rush.
Robert Rush. I'm a 25-year resident. For the last several years, most of Morningside's operations have been on my street, River Avenue. I'm encouraged to hear Morningside's statement. I accept it. I appreciate David Hunt's input and explanation of all the facets of the agreement. I appreciate how difficult it is. I have one problem, and that is his explanation regarding Agreement Article A3 regarding Morningside's ability to acquire 7 and over facilities. What Mr. Hunt, if I got it correctly, if I have it correct, please interrupt if I don't. What you're saying is that, so they start off with 30 beds on the peninsula, and they can acquire, say, an 11-bed facility. So now it takes them up to 41. And now as they might experience fluxes in their bed count, they can deplete, they can lower their count in the agreement-covered beds of 30 and still maintain their acquired bed count of 11, and so thereby preserve indefinitely an 11-bed rehab that may or may not, without acquisition, have gone by the wayside through normal attrition. If Bob Rush wanted to buy that 11-bed house, I may make it work, I may not. 2-3 years, I try to sell it, I can't get what I want, maybe I go bankrupt. It goes by the wayside through attrition, natural attrition. So what the city has done is allowed now a larger operator to gobble that up and then play shell games with the underlying cap beds. Is that what I'm hearing, David? Mr. Hunt? Well, am I right in my assumption of the fluctuation occurring in the capped beds area.
I think our format for this is you can ask questions or ask the questions be asked, but we're not going to engage in a soliloquy.
That's
or
fine.
back and forth.
Well, my problem is this, is that's kind of a shell game, because we know that these beds can be moved within 5 minutes. Now, I appreciate all the good intentions here, but the bottom line is these contracts are transferable for the next 25 years. And it's not a guarantee that Morningside is going to be the holder of this contract for the next 25 years. And so we can have a holder of this contract play the shell game of holding on to an indefinitely allowed permitted house while playing a shell game, decrease the number of their cap beds to 20, from 30 to 20 to 10, and then expand that at any point in time when transferring people into that permitted house constantly to keep it full, because that's an indefinite allowed permit. So I have a problem with that. It's kind of a sham. This article is kind of, the fact that we include this, and I hope that it doesn't trigger the most favored nation, because what this will do, if they can buy 36 beds in the city, and Sober Living is able to prove that it is a most favored nation trigger, then Sober Living can essentially match the 100% increase that Morningside can do by acquiring 36 beds permitted. They can acquire, Sober Living can acquire an equivalent amount, 200 beds. They can double overnight. Those are two problems, significant problems. I'm upset that I have to explain this one, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory that the shell game will occur.
Thank you, Mr. Rush.
Good evening, Mayor Curry and City Council members. My name is Bettina Deininger, and I live in Newport Beach. I wish these comments to be made part of the public record. We come here tonight to acknowledge some of the items that are in the proposed development agreement, which are not accepted as stated. Morningside Recovery Incorporated is a business which has located itself in our community, and as such should be required to adhere to the city's good business practices. It's not a charitable operation by any means. It is a profit concern. The city claims in the proposed development agreement, which we've all read here, they're coming to you tonight, that the city claims that it's going to retain its police power, if you notice in its PowerPoint. However, the city has openly stated to the community that it will not enforce the smoking, public nuisance, building, or other city regulations relative to the business uses or to their clientele. How can public safety and health be protected when the city continues to refuse to enforce its ordinances? These facilities are not legally immune from enforcement, which any other residential or commercial member of the community would be subject to. Another point is the operational conditions call for at least one qualified manager on site or on call at all times. Does this mean that each address stated in the triplex on LIDO to have 4 clients or residences, each one would have a manager? If not, then this facility is clearly an integral in nature and should be defined as such, what the city you choose not to do. But it is, you know, it's semantics here, I guess. Clear manager's assignments associated with each address needs to be made public and updated on a regular basis. Other operational considerations call for a response within 24 hours. This is inadequate. Someone could be dead in that time. We should have a response of 1 hour should be defined. And as to the compliance with the agreement, it states that Morningside agrees to furnish evidence in good faith. What is that? This is a joke. When Sober Living by the Sea had this triplex on Lido, their clients were sitting out on the curb all the time smoking cigarettes. And that's at the entrance to Lido. You know, you drive onto Lido and you'd see all these people sitting there smoking away, okay? So they never enforced their ordinances. What makes us think that Morningside will do the same? Your zoning code agreement states that the city code enforcement will notify the Morningside staff member by email and telephone at the time of inspection. Anyway, 4 hours, but not less than 2 hours prior to inspection. Why? Residents get no notification to come in and inspect themselves. Why should they Morningside be any different? Why do we have to call them up by email or telephone and say, by the way, we're coming by in 4 hours to inspect you? Anyone can say they can clean up all kinds of stuff in that time.
Thank you.
I ask that there be an extension of your deliberations to these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm getting too old. My name is Willis Longyear, and I live on Lido Isle as a resident. We're concerned about the advisability for the development agreement to contain a clause which allows it to be in effect for 25 years. Most long-term conditions like that are to permit lenders to be obtained for long-term building developments where time is required to build the place out, and they have to make the income to pay back the lent money before the agreement expires. There's no such requirement here that I know of. The agreement says nothing about Morningside having to develop facilities. I'm not sure that the community would like to see a Morningside tower in the middle of it anyway. Then what else can justify this kind of protection, this long-term protection? If Morningside knocked itself out to be a good citizen in our community by providing appropriate separation of facilities, full-time on-site monitoring of each residence, policing of clients' activities, keeping those facilities clean and smoke-free, and protection of neighborhoods from inappropriate exposure to the rehab process, people in the community would welcome Morningside here. There would be no need for a 25-year period of protection. However, we feel that the 25 years of protection allows Morningside to bring in people, turn them loose on the street with no control whatsoever, because they're protected from anything in the way of control by the city. What we would like to see instead is a 5 or 10-year period with a qualified right for application for extension. And this would provide the incentive for Morningside to keep control of its people, because the extension might not be granted. We've been provided, at least as far as I know, no opportunity to consult with the city on these matters. I saw a sign posted out in front of the building on Antibes that I couldn't understand very well, but and that was the only notice that I had, and that was very recently.
Thank you, Mr. Longyear.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Bill Hitchcock. I live at 131 Via Undine on Lido Island. And first thing I have here is a letter written by a resident to the city, and I'll just read it to you. Dear members of the City Council, I'm a resident at 313 Via Lido Sud in Newport Beach. My name is Dennis Repp, R-E-P-P. I am deeply concerned about the City Council's proposed accommodation to Morningside Recovery. Specifically, I have heard that Councilmember Mike Henn has had a relationship with Lido Drug, which has a valuable right to dispense methadone to Morningside customers. If my information is correct, perhaps the council may want to determine whether or not Council Member Hahn should recuse himself from the Morningside matters. Signed by Dennis Rapp. And I'll just leave this here for you. here's my little yellow sheet. I just have 2 points to discuss. One is the due process issue. The members of LIDO, except from what I understand that the city attorney has made mention of, have not heard anything about this agreement, and the Planning Commission approved this agreement without addressing or without attaching to it the reference to the site on Lido Island. And I'm just wondering, what is it that now gives them the right, gives the city the right to now attach that without having had a proper hearing to be addressed to the members who are affected by this? That smells a little bit to me. And the whole idea of of them being the operator, being able to run these places, and then by affirmative statement saying that we are in compliance is a little crazy. Of course they're going to say they're in compliance. And we don't think that that's valid. We think that the city should be out there doing that for them. And finally, the other issue is the conflict of interest. Councilman Henn appears to have a conflict of interest regarding the sale of drugs to the residents of the subject facility in order to make us all believe it's an arm's length transaction. We think, or I think, the councilman should recuse himself from this particular transaction or anything that's involved with these particular parties. The conflict may be not real, but it's certainly imagined. And if it is real...
Time has expired, sir. Thank you.
Okay. But anyway, we request that you give us a little time.
Time has expired, sir. Thank you.
You're
Next speaker,
welcome.
please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mark Gonzalez, and I'm the president of Newport Crest Homeowners Association. And I was at the commission meeting, and the question was asked, why 29 Imaloa? We would like to make note that the city should really work with Morningside, as well with the owner of 29 Imaloa, in finding an alternate location for their facility within a reasonable amount of time. Due to the fact that the zoning for Newport Crest is different than all of the other properties listed as potential locations. This property does share a common staircase, common walls, and a common entry with 2 neighboring units. So please consider that. And I thank you for your time, and I am hopeful that this agreement will benefit all parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor Curry, council members. My name is Jim Ost. I'm a resident of Lido Isle and also happen to be the president of the Lido Isle Community Association. Of course, this issue has been around for a long time. We certainly want to say thank you to Mayor Pro Tem Henn, David Hunt, and Dave Kiff for spending, I believe it was an hour and a half, with us at our council meeting in August the 11th. The issue, I think, that beyond the fact that we still have a sober living home that's going to reside on Lido has to do with the facility issue. And, David, I think you explained that in that that particular residence is counted as 1 unit per the agreement, if I understood you correctly, even though it has 3 addresses. It seems like there perhaps is a conflict within the agreement itself. And if you look at, I believe it's Exhibit Section 3, Number 5, there's that conflicts with Exhibit 3, I believe it is. It states that each one of those addresses is a specific facility. So understanding how it can be counted as 1 unit is difficult for us to understand that. Beyond that, I guess I would like to just echo some of the comments from the other people that have spoke this evening, and that is, assuming that you eventually do sign an agreement with Morningside Recovery, that you do uphold it and don't leave the people of Lido wondering why you didn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Laura Curran. I live in Corona Del Mar. Good evening, council members. First of all, I'd like to thank Nancy Gardner for addressing the completeness of the Planning Commission minutes. I was, contrary to Mr. Hunt's assertions that the public's comments were included in the reports, I went to the June 3rd Planning Commission meeting. I looked up the minutes, and none of the public comments were included in part or in whole in those minutes. So while there were recommendations, they didn't reflect the full breadth of testimony provided at that meeting, and that's a trend that's continued in other Planning Commission meeting minutes. So I share that concern. So I want to address this issue as well. If you look on your chart of the distancing. So some folks have talked about it, but let's really go and think about this. So the ordinance calls for, and the agreement calls for, one facility per block. So if you take this box, and I do want to say this is from Fashion Island, so Newport Beach taxes came with this box. This would be one facility. On another block, let's say over here, because we're 607 feet away, you have another facility. So that's what the ordinance calls for, and that's what the agreement calls for. But if you look below, it calls for two locations which have adjoining facilities. So 4823 is stacked. So we actually have a duplex with shared walls. And for the public, to be clear, if you look at LIDO and Antibes, you have a third facility and you have a triplex. So we are making an exception here. Contrary to the fact that it says none of Morningside's proposed properties have exclusions from distancing rules, that is not the case. And part of my concern then goes to staffing. We're being told there will be one manager on site to responsibly manage each facility. But with stacked facilities, as with many of these facilities, it makes it more attractive financially and from a management standpoint to have one manager on site, maybe one manager on call. So we end up without the protections, both for the residents, which is the primary concern of ADP. If you talk to ADP, what they're concerned about is the safety of the residents. And if there's only one manager for 3 facilities, how do you have adequate oversight? And if you look long term, the economics of shared staff with a 25-year agreement make it difficult to enforce staffing levels. It'll codify these exceptions, and it will make it difficult to enforce the integral facilities provisions because you're establishing a precedent that we will provide stacked facility exceptions. And in the end, at the end, we're gutting the integral facilities provision of the ordinance, which is an important part of the ordinance. So, as I've said, finally, what's even more maddening is that for a member of the public, the justification for these exceptions is not clear. There's been no background as to why these exceptions are required, when clearly Morningside Recovery knows where the available real estate and willing landlords are. If you witness LIDO, it would be very easy for them to disperse these facilities and comply with the provisions of the ordinance and the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Curran, and thank you for shopping at Fashion Island. May the Lord smile upon you. Are there other speakers? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Most of my comments have already been addressed, so I'll just stick with a couple that have not.
Denise, please state your name.
Denise Oberman, resident of Newport Beach. I wanted to clarify for the public's benefit that there is currently no prohibition or restriction coming from the federal court or any judge within it concerning the city's ability to enforce its ordinance, any provision of the ordinance, including integral facilities. So there's been considerable confusion around that, and City Attorney Hunt did in fact clarify and confirm what I just said. So it is the will of the council that chooses to enforce or not enforce the provisions of its ordinance to protect the public and the disabled at this time. The proposed zoning agreement, we feel, does not provide for any assurance of any deconcentration in the peninsula zone. So, and potentially provides for loopholes, which have already been mentioned, giving rise to potential increase in concentration. I'm going to skip to the issue of assemblies. Mr. Hunt did reference some comments that were made. We do feel that it is important to add some specific provisions in the operational conditions, number 4, under assemblies. Morningside offers client services both on-site and off-site of its residential facilities as part of its business activity. And the clients are free to go to group meetings and other types of activities throughout the peninsula zone, the beach, other locations, etc., for a variety of activities which Morningside endorses, which could well be good for recovery: exercise, training, counseling, group counseling, prayer, meditation, etc. In order to protect the residents of the community and those in the facilities who are trying to recover from erratic behavior and potential risk of relapse, we request that the following specifics be included in the agreement. One is that there not be any type of assemblies within 1,000 feet of, or any business activities of Morningside, either directly conducted or sponsored, within 1,000 feet of elementary schools, daycare, or parks that have children's components. B, the same within 1,000 feet of bars or other establishments offering commercial alcohol or drugs, which could also increase the risk associated with relapse. And C, not participate in any kind of commingling or activities in close proximity to other businesses with similar activities, so that as to overconcentrate a particular area with the type of route, with this type of a use and create risk associated with impacts. Okay, lastly, these special agreements are in fact contract zoning, and which is allowed by law only with full due process and CEQA review, reference to Trancas and Richardson. We know the city recognizes this issue. Since the residents did not have the opportunity for due process associated with the LIDO addresses, we do request that the city give the residents the opportunity for their due process. Then lastly, I just have 2 questions, and I'd like to address them if I may. If not, I'll address them with Mr. Hunt directly after the meeting.
I think your time's expired, Denise.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Are there other
May I do that,
speakers?
Mr. Hunt?
Please come forward. Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, we're going to bring it back to the council. Mr. Hunt, the residents raised a variety of questions. Would you like to make some responses to some of those?
Yes, if I may, I would appreciate that opportunity. I think there are a number of different things raised, but to go to probably the most significant one that has been repeated is the issue of enforcement. It was raised by Mr. Longyear and a number of different individuals that were concerned about it. If one reads the agreement, you will see that there are significant operating conditions that the city can and will enforce. This is not a paper tiger. This is substantially different than the Sober Living by the Sea agreement. It not only creates more compliance requirements, but it also creates a system by which Morningside must certify that it has in fact complied. Now, that's not because the city is just going to accept what Morningside has said. The city also has inspection authority and rights under the agreement, and to address the concern of another residents of LIDO, we do in fact have to give notice to residents before we enter for inspection, and in fact Morningside has agreed to a shortened inspection notice than Sober Living by the Sea, and in fact a very practical inspection notice that we probably wouldn't even be able to utilize in a normal residential address. So Morningside has been quite understanding of the ability for us to confirm their actual compliance with the agreement. So the other concern, focusing on enforcement, I would point out, it was asked, shouldn't they publish where the contact would be? In fact, the agreement requires that they publish where the contact will be. The city will also have that identified, and we will, as we have told other associations, we have code enforcement officers who are trained and have the development agreements and permits. So And the code enforcement will be pursuant to planning and my office, and we are actively involved in making sure that we move forward with enforcement issues. So what one commenter said, that we have said we wouldn't enforce our laws, I don't know how she got that impression. The truth is we will enforce our laws. That's the intent, and every code enforcement officer, as well as the police department, understands that we'll enforce our laws with respect to this matter.
David, I do think part of the confusion is that we do admit that, for example, on our beaches, that people don't call 911 because someone's smoking on the beach and the police don't come down there. But this is a different situation with an annual review, and obviously the neighbors are going to be watching, and complaints will be followed up very closely. So
Yes.
I think there's a distinction between the general things like smoking and those related to an agreement like this.
And I think the concerns, as expressed by that resident, relates to the fact that we can't enforce certain types of laws against a sober living facility. For example, there's been spoken that they're a business. That is true. They are a business. But under federal law, they're providing residential services to the disabled, and therefore, we must allow them in our residential areas. So those are certain laws we cannot enforce. But as far as the operating agreements of smoking and lewd conduct and other issues that exist under our laws, we specifically preserved our rights regarding our police powers, and those will be enforced. So we have, as I talked about, I won't repeat things I discussed with respect to the original discussion. Assemblies are in fact addressed under the operating conditions in another section. It's section 20 under it, dealing with beaches, et cetera. It doesn't do exactly what the public has requested, but in fact it is provided. Let me address the cap issue quickly. I think Mr. Rush has raised an interesting issue. It was very poignant. I took a hard look at the issues after we discussed it today. And what I believe is possibly most important with respect to the with respect to the Morningside agreement is Mr. Rush is referencing transferability. Morningside has waived transferability. There are no transferability provisions in this agreement. This agreement is solely available to Morningside. So should Morningside acquire other facilities, they can't then sell, let's say they want to sell out to Sober Living by the Sea. They can't do it. They can't transfer this agreement. So that shell game, that aspect of the shell game is expressed as concerned by Mr. Rush, does not exist pursuant to this agreement. There are a number of different things, primarily with respect to the issue of enforcement. I would say that the city is taking this very seriously, and we are operating and proceeding with an enforcement capability that will monitor and enforce the issues of this development agreement. And that's what I would respond.
I think that there was also the comment about, are we setting a precedent as far as our integral
with respect
provision?
to integral facilities, what's going on with that is there are still 2 lawsuits pending in the federal court, as well as 7 investigations by the Department of Justice against the city regarding potential violation of the disabled's right to housing. We're not currently set for trial on the lawsuits, but those lawsuits are set for summary judgment and will be set for trial undoubtedly if we don't prevail solely on summary judgment within the next 3 months. The judge who's hearing those lawsuits is Judge Selna. Judge Selna issued an order in the older Sober Living by the Sea case, which was resolved by the Sober Living by the Sea settlement agreement, joining us and preventing us from enforcing our integral facilities the definition. That injunction has been dissolved along with the Sober Living by the Sea judgment. On the other hand, the other cases are still pending before Judge Selna. It is my recommendation to this council and to the city that we not pursue issues related to integral facility while we have currently pending federal case before the same judge who issued an injunction preventing us from utilizing it, which doesn't mean we're going to ignore integrated facilities later, but it doesn't make sense to take action now.
But I think the concern expressed by Laura, for example, when she was doing her example of the boxes, is if we do have what could be considered an integral facility under this agreement, are we setting a precedent? I think your point earlier was...
comment on that too? Yeah.
And my response is we are not. That was my next statement. This is a specific development agreement entered into to settle existing litigation, and I don't believe, I'm sure, it doesn't create any precedent for the interpretation of our ordinance. Mr. Kipp.
I know, looking at the shoebox example, I know Ms. Curran feels very strongly about what's in the code. Well, what's in the code says 1 or 2 uses per block. The other thing that we've already set a precedent with the Sober Living by the Sea agreement is we identified facilities that were stacked duplexes. We even identified the facility that was this triplex on Lido Isle as one facility. So if someone's concerned about a precedent, that was made already. And indeed, our ordinance itself looks at 1 or 2 uses per block. And then, David, I had a couple other notes that you might want to comment on.
Let me just,
Okay.
I've got those briefly on those couple of different issues. There's a discussion regarding CEQA. This project does not have a physical impact on the environment and is exempt from CEQA review. CEQA does not apply to socioeconomic impacts, which this certainly has, but CEQA clearly does not apply to this project based upon socioeconomic impacts, and therefore it's properly considered exempt as addressed in the staff report. The term of the DA, traditionally DAs, what they do is they're providing a term for which the rights can be utilized and to realize returns and create vested rights to those interests during the term. There are, in fact, capital improvements being performed by Morningside and in rejuvenating different facilities, addressing capital improvements or investments they have in Newport Beach. It is a negotiated term. We cannot exceed 25 years pursuant to the charter, but this is consistent with other DA work. Typically, development agreements last upwards of 25 years in order to make sure that the benefit is provided to the applicant. And here, we're settling existing litigation to allow for the recoupment of investment by Morningside, which is why that negotiated term exists. With respect to the allegation of Councilmember Henn's conflict or allegation of conflict, that issue has been previously analyzed by the former city attorney as well as my office, as well as a legal opinion issued by Richard Watson and Gershon, and found no conflict of interest as it relates to the actual operations of any facility for providing for sober living.
As well as the Fair Political Practices Commission.
And also an opinion by the Fair Political Practices Commission. So it's my opinion that Councilmember Henn is not facing a conflict and does not need to recuse himself with respect to this matter. And one last issue, there was a statement that if Morningside would agree to protect the community in the ways that the community would expect, they'd be accepted. Every single thing that resident listed is in fact something Morningside has agreed to do. Smoking, lewd conduct, activity, management. They have agreed to best practices as the city could assert them. They've actually made an effort to become a good neighbor. Now, will there be glitches along the way? I can guarantee you there will, because that's what's happened all along. But I do believe that we in fact have a good faith attempt by Morningside to comply. We have the tools to enforce it, and they've agreed to reasonable and good faith practices to try and minimize the adverse impacts on their community.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
I had 2 more on
Mr.
my
Kiff?
list, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Hunt alluded to this a little bit about due process, as did Mayor Pro Tem Henn, noting that there is another hearing scheduled for this 2 weeks from now, second reading of the ordinance. If anyone felt like they didn't get that notice and didn't get their chance at the podium, they get one other chance at least. And then Mr. Ost with the Lido Isle Community Association brought up what I think was a good point about looking at the exhibit to make sure there isn't a conflict with our facility definition. I think that's appropriate to look at. And the exhibit is the one where we identify each facility by bed count, and we'll want to make sure that's consistent. It's a good point.
Thank you.
Exhibit 3?
Yes.
All right, let me bring this back to the council for comments. Mr. Henn.
Yeah, I'd like to try to bring a little bit of balance to the discussion here this evening. It's a natural tendency when presented with an agreement like this for people who are passionate about the situation to be looking it over carefully and finding things wrong with it, or at least that they perceive are wrong with it. I understand that. Or things that they wish were in it that are not represented. That's always the case in a negotiated understanding, because a negotiation is the product of give and take. This agreement, in fact, in my view, represents a very substantial improvement over both what the circumstance would be without it at all, very substantial, and that was set forth in the chart that the city attorney reviewed, but also a very substantial improvement over what was first reviewed by the Planning Commission. And to me, that's really significant. It in the first place, validates the fact that public hearing and public input is in fact valid and validly considered in this process. This agreement does reflect, I believe, nearly all of the recommendations made by the Planning Commission, as well as some recommendations made by citizens since that Planning Commission meeting, as well as some things that we thought of all on our own that we thought might improve this agreement. And I'd have to say along the way here that the result of this is not as a matter of the city's leverage or ability to mandate these changes. All of these changes come about as a result of discussion and negotiation and cooperative endeavor on the part of Morningside to work with the city to agree to these changes when in fact they were not required to do so and the city had no basis to mandate them to do so. And so I think on the whole, while I might say, gee, it doesn't have everything exactly that I would want in it, and my view of what it ought to have would be different than perhaps every other member of the audience out here. When I stand back from it and look at it in total, I believe it is a very substantive agreement with substantive requirements, operating standards, and enforcement provisions, and verifiable enforcement provisions, that it's a very worthwhile document for us to approve. There was a statement made earlier that it's silly to just rely upon Morningside's assertions of their compliance with the agreement, and I agree with that. And we don't. The city will have to independently verify any of these assertions, and we've improved that capability under this agreement. And so I'd like to thank the city attorney and the city manager, and actually as well as Morningside, for helping to arrive at what I think is a substantially improved outcome for the benefit of the residents, including the residents on Lido Isle, as well as the peninsula. Substantially improved versus having no agreement at all, substantially improved versus the Sober Living by the Sea agreement that was executed and approved by the city a year ago, I guess, and substantially improved from the first version of this agreement that was produced to the Planning Commission and since then. And so there's been a heck of a lot of work done here to get to where we are today. And aside from the change in the exhibit, perhaps to clarify the issue of whether this is a single facility or three facilities, my recommendation, and in fact my motion, is to move forward for approval as recommended here this evening.
Second. Motion and second. Is there further discussion on this matter? Seeing none, please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for coming down tonight. We appreciate your comments. Next item is public comment.
Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record.
Would anyone like to speak on a matter not on the agenda tonight? Please come forward. What? Oh, George, come on down.
Good evening, council members. Been a while since I've been here. I don't bother you much. Last time I was here, John Noyes was mayor, so you know I don't come often. I come on a matter tonight.
George, please state your name for the record.
George Group, I'm sorry. I've been in town 87 years. sometimes it's difficult for me to know who's in charge in the city. I don't mean at this table or the city council, but I recently received a parking ticket next to the American Legion post. I've been very active there since 1930, first as a Cub Scout and then a Boy Scout. I was very surprised to get the ticket. We used the space for about 30 minutes, so my life partner, Martha Summers, could use the ladies' room. I've belonged to the Legion Post for some 30 years. There were no parking spaces. In fact, I got a letter today from the American Legion. They have over 5,000 members now and only 50 parking spaces. So that may be coming up soon. I enjoyed reading a letter at dinner tonight. Every single space for close to 20 minutes with a parking meter was full. It was a Saturday afternoon, and there was an event going on at the American Legion Post. The parking lot in the back was full. We couldn't get in there. I do have a key that allows me in there and a key that allows me in the front door and the back door. So in an emergency, a fellow backed out of a parking space facing the bay and left. And there were 3 other people who wanted to get in there too, but I was ahead of them. So I drove in and parked facing the bay across from Lido Isle. I got out of the car and got down on my hands and knees and looked under the car to see if there was anything painted on the pavement, like no parking, or a post at the curb which said no parking. Neither of the places had anything that said that. So I felt with Martha Summers' card, which I brought in, we were safe to use the space for just a little while. But again now, no word of no parking there. If you've been around town lately, I guess because of the ticket I got and the explanation I wrote, there's no parking signs everywhere. Everywhere. If you own a business like Pavilion's Market or Coco's Restaurant or a drugstore, you have to pay yourself to put no parking in. But I will explain in a minute what I was told by Karen, the superintendent in the traffic division of Newport Beach. Now, the reason this concerns me is there's been about 6 or 7 different groups that have come to me with written information about how this should be handled. And they're all different.
George, your time's expired, although I am curious as to the end of the story.
All right, fine. I knew I wouldn't get very far. I'll leave some cards. I wanted to offer this. Any of you people that want to talk to me in private as a group, the explanation on this is really difficult. And the one thing that concerns me is 9 years ago this year, the Orange County Grand Jury came down on the city of Newport Beach in a way that embarrassed me terribly, and any of you that were around would feel the same way. That's the fastest 3 minutes I ever had.
Well done, sir.
I would like to talk further.
Mr. Kiff is going to
chance.
address these issues for you.
Was this related to a handicap parking stall, or didn't?
It's a very confusing issue. The curb is painted blue, which indicates it's available for handicapping. But I guess the one quick conclusion, I did have a hearing and was told I was guilty, and I learned at the hearing by the attorney you hire from Newport Beach to hear the information. She informed me that 20 days after I got the parking ticket, the city of Newport Beach painted no parking on the space.
Thank you, George. Are there any others?
That shocked you, didn't it? I didn't hear a word. 20 days after I got the ticket, the city painted no parking on the space and didn't tell me they were going to. And I had gone to the city traffic division
Mr. Kiff will address your issues, George. Thank you for coming down. Yeah, are there any other speakers on the matters not on the agenda? All right, then we're going to close public comments. We'll go to item 28, the Civic Center project.
So, Mr. Mayor and council members, this is an important item, but I also know it's 9:34, which isn't too late for us. But this is an item for the folks at home and for you here today that involves the Civic Center project, which certainly has gotten a bit of attention lately. This is an important one for us because it's the second expansion of the contract with CW Driver, because it folds in the parking structure. And I think the good news that we certainly wanted to share with you is that the parking structure, the low bid, a good low bid, came in about $2 million below what we estimated. And that's significant. I think it sends a good positive signal to what we should expect to see as the rest of the bids come in. So we have a couple of things we could talk to you about today. We could talk specifically about the parking structure and the bid, and then I also have information, if you'd like to hear it, and I want to defer to you in light of your interest or lack thereof, about how the guaranteed maximum price contract works and how construction management at risks work. And I know this will bore Mr. Webb no end, but I think there's a lot of confusion in the public about why this contract is what it is and why it grows. And I wanted to kind of liken it to someone's own home if they were going to do a home remodel, which I'm in the late stages of. If you were to do it, construction manager at risk. And I think people might understand it better. So up to you.
I have one question. I've had a very calm relationship with this project. Location's fine. I think the design is really neat. And I believe when it's completed, it's going to be like Oasis, a real source of functionality and pride for the community. I have been getting a lot of questions. I know I passed most of them on to you. And the question that I have that I'm hoping you can address in your presentation is how the change orders will be processed. And that comes from some of the construction experts in the community, how we're going to go about doing that.
Okay.
If you could address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, Steve, you want to talk about the parking structure, and then I could do the second one too. So Steve Badham's our Public Works Director, and Steve has been tied like a twin to this project for probably 2.5 years now. Yeah, I have the clicker.
Technical difficulties there. Really quick, I guess the theme of this is good news. Let's give you a little recap of what we did. Back in last spring, in conjunction with the building committee and our design team and CW Driver, we identified through value engineering a process which could give us potential savings by going to essentially a design assist build process. And what that is the architect came up with with a set of plans that essentially we call bridging documents to kind of set the architectural tone, the size, the capacity of the building, but we don't exactly specify how it's constructed. The idea is to bring in people that build parking structures every day that are more qualified than probably our design team is in order to come up with this plan in an effort to save some money. What we did was we pre-qualified 10 potential contractors that we thought could do this design build process. And then we had them submit proposals based on the bridging documents that BCJ, our design team, came up with. We received about 7 proposals, and we went through and scored those proposals. And we took the top 3 firms, which were Baumel, McCarthy, and ARB, and we sat down with them to explore various ideas they had in order to reduce the cost of the structure. After meeting with all 3, we compiled the items that we thought made the most sense to the city and kept the integrity of the design and the architectural features that we know the building committee wanted to keep in this project. So after we did that, we asked them for proposals, essentially bids for this for that. We took those top 3, and here's the good news. The lowest proposal was $6,367,000, And I guess the big news here is Baumel Construction. The good news here is that back in April 27th of the same year, we were thinking along the lines of about an $8 million project, which we've almost saved about $2 million in this process just because of good bidding climate. And even going back a little farther, we were at a point where we were closer to $11 million. And Dave, I did find another number where we were actually up to $14 million when we were considering a screen or a trellis structure over the top. So as you can see, I guess the message here is that we've been continually refining the design, doing value engineering, and pushing this cost down. And in fact, our good news is that we're looking like we've beat the early estimates by about $2 million, $5 million from the early estimates. And also, it kind of continues on the theme that the mass excavation and shoring wall contract came in about $1 million cheaper than we thought it would, too. So I guess what we're saying is this points to a really good thing for our future, for the rest of the project. And I think we're on track with saving a lot of money. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that this trend continues. We think it will. And that's really, really very, very good news. What's next? And by December, early December, we're going to have our plans 100% complete, and we plan for permit issuance at that time. We will go out through the months of November and December and bid the various trade packages. CW Driver will be taking the lead in a lot of that. We're hoping to have final numbers in the second meeting of January to bring to you to decide which components to move forward with. We're hoping the numbers will come in very good, and we'll be able to do a great project for way under what we think we're going to get, keeping our fingers crossed on that. And hopefully in January and February, we'll be able to start the construction. And of course, as you know, our target date for completion is still the fall of 2012, with probably a move-in around December of that same year. That is the quick version.
Steve, November, December, bidding for various trade packages. What does that mean? Bidding started, bidding complete, bids awarded?
Yeah, all of the above, I guess, is what that is. And I can ask, William Hahn is here from CW Driver if we need to ask more detailed questions. But basically, what's going to happen is once the various pieces of the plans are pulled together, he'll be able to formulate various packages, like, say, the foundation and so on and so forth, the steel, purchasing of the steel, various trade packages. He will put those out, and as those get ready, he'll put them out to bid as they're approved. And then we'll try to get them out as fast as we can. And we'll be getting numbers back during those 2 months, is, I guess, the idea. In fact, William and I have kind of a scheme where we might even try to start that process a little earlier. Well, it's a scheme because the architect is pushing back a little bit, but we're going to push him really hard and make sure we do that, because the sooner we get these numbers, the better we're going to feel about the project, and we'll be able to share those numbers with the council. We're hoping to have all of those numbers back, and poor William has to work through the holidays in order to get this done, and he's on board and he's very committed to getting that done. So. I think we're going to have some real good numbers.
I'd encourage you to move sooner rather than later on those.
And we're in building plan check right now. We're fast tracking that. We have a process where we're outsourcing a lot of this the review work. We're doing something very similar to what we did with the Lexus, where we completed within 8 weeks, and we think we're going to do that, and we might even be able to beat that. So as soon as we have permit issuance, we'll have firm plans where we can actually get some real numbers. But I think we're going to need to have that permit issued to be sure that the numbers are appropriate.
Who is spearheading the plan check?
What do you mean as far as who we've hired?
What company?
We've hired a company called Interwest that is well known in building plan check. They have offices up in San Francisco, and the idea that they have an office up there, we want to have them work hand in hand with the designer. So that our building plan check people who are reporting to the city manager's office will be looking at their design as it moves forward. And there'll be a constant interaction, a collaborative process to get these plans, so they're in a form that they are able to be issued for permit. Any other questions?
I wanted to then, if it's okay, spend a little bit of time with you. I handed out a presentation. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to focus on the construction manager at risk contract and how your action tonight, how that might increase it. So I'm going to start with just the general approach here is that we don't build projects like this often, but the private sector does. So we should be hiring a private company to do it through a competitive process. And then when you involve them early enough, they're part of the design and constructability analysis and value engineering. And then you can just transition that immediately into the construction aspect of it. And you also assign the risk and potentially some of the reward to them. So the model that we're talking about building is called construction manager at risk. They're hired early. They promise the project delivery at a set price, and that's called the GMP, or the Guaranteed Maximum Price contract. And it's typically executed when 100% of the construction document plan set is done. And then after you open and you normalize the bids, and Steve talked about something that was indeed the normalizing, where you sit down with the qualified bidders and you talk about some value engineering. You make sure that they're actually appropriately bidding the project. The next step is important one. The construction manager usually gets a set profit percentage, and then this is from 3 to 7%. And there's also an incentive, which I mentioned, and that incentive is a share of the unspent construction contingency. And there's also a penalty, and the penalty is if they go over budget, and over the agreed upon maximum price for the contract, thus the guaranteed maximum, they have to cover all of that. So about the contractor that we use, as Steve mentioned, it's CW Driver. We did an RFQ back in 2008. 24 different firms responded. 7 firms were interviewed by council using a qualification-based selection process. The 7 are listed there. CW Driver was the top-ranked firm. They were hired in January 13th. And Driver's contract is on the web for folks who want to look at it. About this specific contracts, it includes 4 major components. And remember, it's over 2.5 years. But it includes their direct costs, where they actually would pay for the cost of insuring and bonding this project. It includes what are called general conditions or basic services. And this is the actual cost, the actual cost of the fence and the trailers and the restrooms, the traffic control, all the things that are out there on this relatively complex site. It's paid in increments, monthly increments, based on the actual costs they accrue. And it's at a not-to-exceed amount. That's a big amount, $7.1 million. But remember, this is a 2.5-year project that is one of the largest projects the city will ever embark upon. Then there's no profit on that number. They have to show us their actual costs. Then there's their construction management fee. This is where they make the profit. It's 3.25% on all of the actual costs. So this is a summary of the actual costs to date. We start with a small contract, and then which is basically the general conditions. Then we fold in the Mass X and shoring wall contract. Then now we're proposing to fold in the parking structure to that contract. And there's a construction contingency in each of those. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with my house example. And then the subsequent amendments that you'll see again are when all the subtrade bids that Councilmember Selich and Steve were just talking about, when those come in. Not included in the contract is something called an owner's contingency, and if unused, 100% of that goes back to the city. This is something that's in our running numbers, so when people see the number that scares them, we have a big owner's contingency in that. That's the proper way to plan. So again, here's kind of how it works. Just like if you were designing, you make an agreement with a contractor, the CW Driver in this case, and they hire everybody else. Again, that's why the contract grows. My example is a home remodel. And let's say this was done construction manager at risk. You have individual components. They're all here. You have a little bit of contingency with each one. Say you have a contingency for your windows and doors. You have a bigger contingency for some of the stuff that's scarier, like foundation and site prep. These are construction contingencies. Let's say the foundation comes in at $11,000 instead of $10,000. You want to save a little bit of money to accommodate that. So in your chart on the side, it talks about, here's how, like if I were remodeling my home, I'd have and if I were doing it this way, I'd have about $64,000 here, and all these things added up. Another 5 would be my construction contingency. I also save some money on my own, just in case I wanted to make a last-minute change, like better plumbing appliances or better appliances or something. I would hire that contractor, and I'd say they could get 3.5% of the profit of on their direct costs, and that's again the price of like a construction fence and the portage on, and maybe the extra labor, and the insurance they might pay to cover for that. And then they'd get 3.25% of the actual work completed of each subtrade. And for this project specifically, here's kind of what it would look like. My estimate when I started, I estimated these would be my bids, my contingency would be in there. My starting estimate was $85,000. The actual work done, here's when it's all done. The subtrades came in, and by golly, I nailed that. I also had a great contractor, so none of the construction contingency was spent. So my actual work done was $64,000. I had some direct costs. Those are billed here. Those are $6,000. That goes to the construction manager. The contractor's profit, again, is on actual work done. So it's 3.25% over the 64. There's also, he can take a profit on the direct costs, because those are things he wouldn't have otherwise incurred if it weren't for my contract. And then if we were doing it the way we're doing the Civic Center project, I would have also given him 25% of the $5,000 construction contingency that was saved. That's $1,250 in this case. So the contractor in all of that made a profit of $3,500. And I want to make an important point that some people can't quite struggle with. The contractor earns more when they save the contingency. There's no incentive for the contractor to blow the contingency, because the profit on the contingency is so much less than if they were to get the 25% split of the total contingency saved. That makes sense? You kind of see the numbers there. And then when you start to add that up, again, here's how the project ended up. Here was the amount in the contract. I was able to retain 75% of the construction contingency, and I exercised great control over my design tendencies, and I saved all the owner's contingency. So my net project cost was $73,000 instead of $85,000, which was my estimate. So think of this on a much larger scale, and here it is. It's that next chart for you. But it's the same process. You have an owner's contingency, which you save. That's there on the right. You have general conditions, the fences, the trailers. You have the mass excavation, where we have a larger contingency, because more scary things can happen in the mass excavation phase. You have the 2 parks. You have the parking structure, the library expansion. So you can kind of see how all of that magnifies when you do a project like this, but the core principles are the same. This is another way of explaining how this would work graphically. You start, my battery's running out. No, there it's back. You start down here in April 2010 with the smaller contract, just general conditions. By May, we folded in the mass excavation and shoring wall, so we were up here. By right now, we're proposing to fold in the parking structure, this next line. What will happen next is we'll fold in everything else, assuming you continue to take this path. The city office building, the North Park, the Central Park, the library expansion. So that's why this contract is going to grow, but the profit is still the same, 3.25%, and then an opportunity to take a share of the contingency. So I'll stop there. I mentioned kind of the similarities there between a house and the Civic Center. Councilmember Daigle brought up the point of change orders. We're proposing to post, there are some change orders that you delegated to the building committee, and those involve, if I'm remembering this correctly, the change orders to the owner's contingency. Right. Those would be brought to the building committee and then posted on I'd make them available to all of you and the public on our website for the Civic Center project. We don't expect to have to spend that. We're hoping to save it, obviously, but that's at least the delegation thus far. So it needs to be transparent, though. With that?
Dave, I guess I just want to point out, or perhaps reemphasize one thing, and that is the construction costs here. There's no opportunity for padding, if you will, on behalf of CW Driver by signing a contract, let's say, with the plumber for a higher number, then bring it in lower, and then they get their savings, their percentage savings. What happens here is each individual contract is bid out. We take the lowest bid, and that then becomes the number that CW Driver is managing against, the lowest bid number. If they're able to find a way to bring it in less than that lowest bid number, that's when they can get some improvement. But then for every 25 cents of they get, the city gets 75 cents. So that's a really key aspect of this. There's the opportunity for CW Driver to make more money out of this contract derives from true construction cost savings.
Very well put. I'm glad you emphasized both the open bid process. I think they're done in the city clerk's presence, so that everybody can see, hey, the glass on this project is coming in, the low bid was X. And you're right, when CW Driver can exact a more efficient or effective way of delivering that product, they get 25 cents, we get 75 cents of every dollar. So it's a terrific incentive that saves us money.
Mr. Selich.
Well, the real story here is how we've been able to save money. It's really a combination of things, the value engineering and all of the attention that goes into the details of all the different components of the City Hall project. Decision that this council made, as Steve said last spring, to go to this design assist build concept, which was a huge savings, and then the bidding environment that we're in. But it's working all these elements together that we've basically been able to take something that when we first started looking at this was virtually $15 million and cut it down to a little under $7 million. And there's been a lot of work, and it's going on in all the other components of this project. Each and every component is being looked at very critically every step of the way. So, the result here is as a result of all that work. And I'd like to make a motion to approve the staff recommendation here.
Second. All right, motion and second. I would just say, Dave, thank you for this, I think, very clear and timely discussion about this entire process. We've had more than 30-some public meetings related to the design and the financing and the construction of the Civic Center, and I really think we have gone the extra mile to be transparent and to make this information available to the public, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the story that ran in the pilot this morning where we walked through this in print for people so that they could read it. The one thing I've learned here is every time we do award one of these contracts, we don't award it to 3 other firms, and so there's always a little grousing out on the backside. But the answer to that is next time sharpen the pencil and win. And I think we're going to be very pleased with the outcome of this project as we move forward. Seeing no further discussion, motion on the table, please. I'm sorry. Is there public comment on this matter? Excuse me. All right. Seeing none, a motion on the table, please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Item 29, the naming of the Evelyn Hart Event Center. Mr. Kiff, is there a staff report?
Yes, we're happy to make a brief staff report for you, Mr. Mayor and Council. And as Councilmember Gardner pointed out in correcting the minutes, she made a recommendation to refer a discussion about naming of the Oasis Center or aspects of the Oasis Senior Center after former council member Evelyn Hart. And that item did indeed go to PB&R. Laura Detweiler is here to offer some comments on it. We also have for you kind of some concept pictures of what signage might look like. As you probably know, if you've been out to the site, the signage is up. The signage is up before this discussion. So there's a large monument sign that says the Oasis Senior Center. There are a couple of different opportunities that we'll discuss with you. So with that, I'll introduce Laura.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'd like to think that we've saved the best for last tonight as we speak about honoring a very special person to us here in Newport Beach. And as Dave shared with you, the Commission, at your direction, did consider this item at their September 7th meeting. there were various items that they looked at in making their decision, and those included Council Policy B9, which is naming of parks and facilities, also the history behind the center and those who've been involved in it and how its name came to be. And then also revisions to B9, which took place back in 2003. And we actually had two commissioners currently on the commission that were sitting in that seat that were very familiar with the changes that took place and why they took place. And the reasoning behind those changes were concerns about setting precedent that the city could not fulfill, as there are many prominent members of the community deserving recognition, and there would simply not be enough naming opportunities to satisfy that request, and that this would place greater value on one person's contribution to the community over the other. These same issues were discussed in detail with the commission, and they also felt that the policy was in place for very good reason. There was considerable amount of public comment. We had over 50 emails, letters, public testimony the night of the commission meeting, and all of which resulted in their recommendation to leave the facility name as the Oasis and designate the large multipurpose room as the Evelyn Hart Event Center. And Dave has pulled up a picture. This is a mock of what we're proposing to do for signage. This is the entry into the event center. We would be using a champagne color letter, and those are similar to the colors of the window mullions that you're seeing in the doors there as well. So if you move to approve this item tonight, we'll move very quickly to see that we get this naming up on the building in time for our grand opening on October the 9th. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Laura. Councilmember Gardner, this was your item.
Yes. Just the first thing is, above all, the Oasis Senior Center, the project. I know that no matter how the decision comes out, there are going to be some disappointed people. But I'm just hoping we keep our focus on the center. It's a beautiful building. It's come in on time and under budget. Represents great work from the community. I think staff has done a marvelous job of keeping all the projects going, all the classes going while during the building process. As things have come up with neighbors, we've been able to resolve them. It's just been a win-win-win. So I think that is the main thing. I think everybody, no matter what side they stand on the issue, has agreed that we want to salute Evelyn Hart for all that she's done for the city. And I think that the recommendation of Parks, Beaches, and Recreation certainly has been well received by many of the people who were involved with the Oasis project and who had hesitations about naming an entire building, wanted to keep it as the Oasis, but were extremely enthusiastic about the idea of the Evelyn Hart Event Center.
Make a motion? Make a motion? Yeah.
All right, so I'll make a motion that we accept the PB&R recommendation.
I'd like to second.
Yeah, let me also, if I may, just speak to that as well, because tonight really is a celebration of the life and career of Evelyn Hart. I was on the city council for 2 days when Evelyn came into my office to talk to me about Oasis. And 4.5 years later, we're getting ready to open the new facility. And that's a tribute to her drive and determination and perseverance and consensus building to get that building where it is today. Her terms as mayor, you can go all over the city and find buildings and parks and facilities that are there because of the leadership of Evelyn Hart. She made this community better and has made it better for decades. And I really applaud, and I think this is an appropriate way to recognize a lifetime of service and dedication to the community. And we should be celebrating tonight Evelyn's contributions and this great honor to have what will be the largest event center at Oasis named after her. You know, one thing that this process did show is that the Oasis Center is beloved by many, many members of our community. People who have been using this facility for decades and who have a real vested personal stake in it, particularly the Friends of Oasis and the volunteers who work there day in and day out. And the thing we ask our PB&R Commission to do is to forge a consensus about what the proper way of recognizing these accomplishments are. And I think they did a good job at listening to the community, all members of the community, and in forging a solution that responds to the need of consensus. You know, when you write for the newspaper, your art is to be provocative, but the art of governing is to build consensus. And I applaud them for the patience and the perseverance that they put forward to forge this consensus on behalf of the community and on behalf of Evelyn. On October the 9th, when we open this facility, it will be a marvelous and wonderful community celebration, made more so because of the recognition of Evelyn Hart's contribution to it. And it's something that we should all embrace and be proud of. So I am very pleased to support this recommendation, and I look forward to a tremendous and glorious opening of Oasis in a couple of weeks. Anyone else wish to speak? Let me open.
I would say that,
Daigle?
you know, obviously you would want the center, you know, that to come about through acclamation. You know, it's clearly not going to, but on the other hand, I wouldn't be opposed to calling it Evelyn Hart Oasis Center either. So I'll certainly go along with the recommendation if there aren't 4 votes.
Okay, thank you.
But I think Evelyn is highly deserving.
Thank you. Are there members of the public who would like to speak?
Good evening. I'm Marilyn Brewer. I've been a resident of Newport Beach since 1984. I'm here to speak in support of naming it the Evelyn Hart Oasis Center. I don't think anybody wants the name Oasis Center to go away because that's the identity of it. But let's see, 16 years on the city council, 2 terms as mayor. Newport Beach has had several mayors. Most of them have been in absentia since the end of their terms. Not Evelyn. She was the moving force behind Oasis 33 years ago, and she stepped to the plate to lead the charge just a couple years ago. She's in her 70s, but she's still a moving force. And as Mayor Curry said, this isn't just about her leadership for Oasis. It's about her body of work for this entire city. She retired from the city council. She never retired from Newport Beach. She's been actively involved fighting on behalf of our constituency, from city council to Oasis to airfare, another important issue to this city. Does it matter that Evelyn took the lead on Oasis? I stand here before you to tell you that it does. I made a sizable contribution to the building of Oasis. The only reason I did that was because the ask came from Evelyn Hart. And I did it out of love and respect for her commitment and the way that she has stood up and fought for this city. I know it appears difficult to overturn the recommendation of your commissioners because you've appointed them. But precedence has already been set by you, this body, in regards to that. There were many commissions and reports that had ideas about where the Civic Center project should be. The citizens of this city wanted it in a different place, and that's where it is today. You talk about naming something after someone who is alive and well. When could you better enjoy the effort, but the honor? But that precedence has been set, too. We have the Donna and John Crean Library. We have the Marion Bergeson Aquatic Center. We have Marion Bergeson's Grammar School. The senator was here earlier in support of this measure. She would like to see it named for Evelyn Hart. So I say to you that I stand here today and I ask you to reconsider your motion and name it. It's always going to be Oasis Center, but it could be the Evelyn Hart Oasis Center. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I guess I started this, so I get to finish this little exercise here. So thank you for listening to us tonight. We appreciate your comments before, Mayor. We do want consensus, and we want this to be a happy time. Tim Stokes, and I'm a resident of Newport Beach. I might say that this is a different picture than what I got sent a couple weeks or a week ago. So I'm hoping that we're not switching things up for a good reason, but we're transparent about that process too. I'm going to keep my comments tonight are going to be very short. I'm asking the council to think about Evelyn Hart, not others, and not myself. The question you need to ask yourself is quite simple. what everyone wants to know tonight, has Evelyn Hart done enough to deserve the naming of the Oasis Center? Did you ever think that one person could make such a difference in our community? Has she made a life truly better for all you personally or other friends and family in our community? What we want to know tonight is, has she done enough to deserve this honor? With that answer, I'm sure you'll honor Evelyn Hart with what she has expressed to her friends to be the greatest honor in her life, the naming of Oasis Center to the Evelyn Hart Senior Center. Do this for her tonight, and do this so she can see this in her lifetime, the name on the building. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Any other speakers?
Good evening. My name is Jean Price. I've been a resident of Newport Beach since 1980. I guess I've owned property here since 1976. And many of you on the dais know me from other city matters, and I guess that's what I want to say tonight. I don't want to take very much time. I know it's late, and we can't probably say anything more about the tremendous contributions that Evelyn has made than we've already said. I'm on the Oasis Gala Committee, but I really got to know Evelyn better from her efforts on airfare. If she hadn't been the mayor of Newport Beach during the 1985 settlement agreement, I can't even imagine where the city would be today. She has continued to make enormous contributions in every area of Newport Beach to increase and enhance the quality of life of our citizens. When we have to talk to someone at the county, someone at the state level, you need to talk to a senator. The people on airfare call Evelyn because she opens every door for you right away. And that means a lot to the city. It's really helped the city in so many ways, and it continues to open doors for us to do more for the city. I can't imagine anyone more deserving to have a center named after them than Evelyn Hart. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gloria Alkire. I live at 14 Barlovento Court. And I'm not going to elaborate on the things that you've been hearing about Evelyn, because I know that all of you are quite aware of her achievements and goals, and I also have gotten to know her professionally as a member of Airfare. But beyond that, as a former superintendent, and having to deal with policy, administrative regulations, as all of you do, one thing that I would like to plant in your minds that may have kept all of us and our community from going at each other, and for you to have such a difficult decision, is for us to have clarity on the policy or the administrative regulations related to naming parks, buildings, etc., after people. Evelyn has been caught in the middle of this, and it hasn't been a pleasant thing, because she's not the kind of person who really wants to bring attention to herself. He admitted that he brought this, and he wanted this to happen, and so did many other people, and then there are other people that have different points of view. We've kind of put ourselves in the middle here, because the policy, if there is one, wasn't clearly stated in the paper or told to news people so that people could say, oh, well, it's a nice thing that we've thought about naming this after Evelyn, but basically the city's policies prevent us from doing this for these reasons. So if we make sure that we are clear on what we do and how we do it, and we can refer to policy, then that's how we protect, as I was a superintendent, parents from manipulating my board to get things done based on personal reasons. And I could always refer to policy or make sure I had good policies in place to make sure I could let my board off the hook and say, while we'd like to name this school after this particular person in the community, basically these are the processes. So I would just like to urge all of us to consider having really clear processes and administrative regulations and policies in place so that we don't get in a situation where we kind of do have this terrible decision to make, and we also put our citizen in the middle of this who many people say they love. And that is simply a comment from me, and it goes for many, many other things that we do.
Thank you, Gloria. I think that was actually very well said. It's I think one of the most unfortunate parts of this is that Evelyn has been sort of caught in the middle of other people's controversies on this, and it shouldn't detract from the honor of having the event center named after her, and I think that was a very good observation about the city needing to be clear about our policy and approaches on this. Are there other speakers? All right, then I'm going to bring it back to the City Council. Will anybody else wish to speak? Mr. Selich.
Yeah, well, I would just say that I agree with Leslie that I could just as easily support naming this the Evelyn Hart Oasis Senior Center, but I will support the motion.
Okay. Motion is to name it the Evelyn Hart Event Center. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Hinn.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I had the opportunity to work with Evelyn and the rest of the folks that were involved with making this new Oasis Center a reality, and there's no question about Evelyn's contribution or the contribution of a number of other people that really worked hard to make all this happen. And so I, for one, feel no sense of loss or difficulty here. I'm glad, as you are, to celebrate Evelyn by the naming of that event center for her.
Please vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Well, it is with great pleasure that I announce that the event center at the Oasis Senior Center has been named the Evelyn Hart Event Center. Is there a motion for reconsideration? Seeing none, we stand adjourned.